The action takes place in the town museum. Zhang Yuan, a tour guide, was showing a group of visitors a huge ancient sarcophagus found in the year 2024. The guy told visitors how the sarcophagus was found and explained that the lid and body of the sarcophagus were a single structure, for which reason it had not been opened since the excavation. Zhang Yuan led the group further towards the excavation exhibit. The red-haired girl was broadcasting online at this moment, her camera pointed towards the sarcophagus. Jun said it was forbidden to take pictures of valuable exhibits, but the girl replied to him that she wasn't taking pictures of the exhibit. She was taking pictures of him. Zhang Yuan stared at the screen incomprehensibly. The girl showed the guy a broadcast on her phone. There were indeed many flattering comments about the guy in the broadcast chat. Zhang Yuan apologized and explained that, in any case, videotaping was forbidden in the museum. He also politely asked the girl not to distract him from his work and started catching up with the tour group. The girl caught up with Zhang Yuan and asked if he knew what was inside the sarcophagus. The guy explained that it was made of a material that didn't allow detector beams to pass through to analyze its contents. Therefore, no one knows what's inside, Zhang Yuan summarized. Together with the girl, they looked at the sarcophagus, many times taller than themselves. The girl sighed disappointedly. Suddenly, they were announced that due to a planned fire drill, the museum would be closing in 10 minutes. Jun thought what kind of fire drill, since there was no warning about it, but the girl cheerfully asked if that meant he was exempted because of the drill. The girl offered Zhang Yuan to have dinner together, but the guy took her by the arm and commanded her to run towards the exit. The ground began to go out from under my feet and the ceiling started to collapse. The boy was surprised and assumed that an earthquake had started. Zhang Yuan turned his attention to the cawing of crows outside the window. He noticed that the birds were trying to fly away from the museum. A voice from the loudspeaker announced that the gold-level portal would appear in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. It also called for all units to prepare for battle, eliminate the portal, and ensure the safety of the civilians. Zhang Yuan was shocked. He didn't understand what portal we were talking about, and worried if everyone was able to get out of the museum. The commander was loudly handing out instructions. He put Zhonglan in charge, and Yu Jiyu as his deputy. A group of armed men ran towards the museum. Zhonglan, a girl with long silver hair, remembered that her brother was waiting for her at home. She also noticed that the presence of the newcomers would affect the battle with the monsters. She ran at the head of the squad, while her subordinates shouted at her to take her time. Zhang Yuan was very surprised to hear a familiar name outside the window. Holding the girl, he tried to calm her down and offered to go to the shelter. At the same time, he convinced himself that the names of the girl at the window and his sister were just a coincidence. Zhang Yuan tried to hurry the girl, but her legs gave out and she started to fall. The girl fell to the floor, blood spurting from her mouth and ears. From what he saw, Zhang Yuan's face contorted in horror. A group of militants look at the portal that is opened above the museum. Zhang Lan, clutching her sword in her hands, hurried her comrades. Zhang Yuan tried to make a phone call, but there was no connection. He scolded himself for not having enough money for a better phone. The sarcophagus was right above him. The guy decided he might as well try using the dead girl's cell phone and picked it up. Zhang Yuan was horrified and covered his mouth with his hand. The boy's face contorted with horror. On the phone display, he saw a black funnel, from which red eyes stared at him. Zhang Lan, along with his 2 battle comrades, rushes towards the portal from which a huge hand appeared. The subordinate suspected that there was some kind of mistake, and the portal might be a level higher than stated. But Zhang Lan didn't stop that, and she commanded her to be on guard. Zhang Lan slashed the sword at the hand that came out of the portal. The girl noticed that 3 of the supports were broken, and a hole would soon form in that spot. Zhang Lan concluded that the danger level was catastrophic, and gathered all the strength she had to attack. The girl struck a blow on her arm, putting all her strength into it. Her subordinate was astonished by what she saw and assumed that Zhang Lan was able to absorb the power of the 5 crystals. Meanwhile, the part of the squad that remained further from the epicenter realized that they had been misinformed and the portal was more dangerous than they thought. The man commanding the operation gave the command to get ready and be on guard, as the portal could draw them in. Zhang Lan replied that handling it would be very difficult. The commander, perplexed, interrogated what she meant. The girl, tirelessly wielding her sword, suggested that she was now fighting illusions and that to win, she needed to find the one who created them. Zhang Yuan stared in horror at the red eyes behind his back reflected in the cell phone screen. Suddenly, a huge demonic hand appeared over the guy. He starts to run, stumbles over the girl's corpse, and realizes that this is the end. A demonic hand strikes the sarcophagus and it falls. Zhang Yuan was crushed by the sarcophagus. With only his hand and the phone, he was trying to call his sister from outside. The sarcophagus began to burn around the edges. Zhang Yuan and his clothes turned completely white. A whirlwind of flames surrounded him, yet his consciousness did not leave him. The guy assumed that he was dead. Suddenly, the boy heard his sister's name and voice in the midst of conversations among the members of the squad. his face contorted with fear. Judging from the negotiations, Zhonglan refused to obey the order and retreat, wanting to kill the monster. Her brother couldn't believe his ears and didn't understand how she could be here. The image of his sister, one of the best students in the class, a gentle and well-mannered girl, appeared before his eyes. She was exactly as he knew her, and he couldn't believe she'd been at the center of the accident. Zhang Yuan convinced himself that he was just imagining things. He didn't understand why he couldn't see anything and tried to break through the veil with his hands. He screamed, begging to be allowed to see his sister. Suddenly, the image of Junlan appeared in front of his eyes. The boy recoiled in surprise. The sister, shouting curses, brought her sword above her head. With a wide swing, Zhonglan struck her brother. Blood spurted out of his mouth. The demon began to extend its paws towards Junlan, but she managed to repel the attack. The girl was horrified to realize that the monster was materializing and there was no turning back. The protective barrier that Zhonglan used to restrain the monster split into small pieces. The man also grudgingly noted that the demon had incarnated into a physical shell and they had very little time left. No more than 3 minutes. He should have taken care of Zhonglan, but the other guy assured him that nothing would happen to her. Zhang Yuan inside the monster begged his sister to stop after he saw her protective field split. But she didn't hear her brother's pleas and attacked. Her brother couldn't find his place and kept shouting for Zhonglan to stop attacking, because it could lead to her death. The demon fended off all attacks and grabbed the girl with its tenacious paws while she was not expecting the attack. He threw Zhonglan back with an incredible force that the girl couldn't deflect. The bullet flew down from such a great height, and when it landed, it raised a huge cloud of dust. Then Zhang Yuan sobbed and finally realized that his sister couldn't hear his words. He called out to Zhonglan in desperation, begging her not to die. He tried to get out of this creature, and realized the reason why his sister was so rarely at home, covering up by going for walks. Zhang Yuan thought that if he had known about this earlier, he would have done something about it. Zhang Yuan sobbed and blamed himself for not being interested in what was going on at her school. After all, Zhang Lan had good grades. Then he got to the edge of space and mentally reached out to his sister, asking her to stop and assuring her that he would save her. A snippet of the phrase still reached Zhang Lan, who was a considerable distance away from her brother. But this time she couldn't give up. After all, if she retreated, the entire city would be reduced to dust by the destruction the demon would bring. Zhang Lan set her mind resolutely. This is also their home here. If she retreated, who would defend this place? Who would protect her brother but herself? She needed to hold out a little longer and then she'd be able to figure something out. Zhang Lan swung around and wished death on the monster that had Zhang Yuan inside of it. Her mind was spinning with thoughts of her duty to protect her brother and their home by crushing the demon that had come to destroy everything. Zhang Lan flew upwards, getting closer and closer to the monster to give it a decisive blow. But Zhang Yuan was not satisfied with this arrangement and begged his sister to run away as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, he was being consumed by an unknown flame. Zhang Yuan was unconscious, but one blink of an eye, he opened his eyes, which were full of surprise and didn't understand what was going on. He was lying in a hospital bed and determined by the smell of medicine that he had found himself in a hospital. Zhang Yuan looked at the bedside monitor and saw that his blood pressure and heartbeat were at 0. From this, he concluded that the machine was broken. After all, the one was alive. Suddenly, a conversation came from the corridor and Zhang Yuan listened. The voice was saying something to his sister, but he missed much of it and only heard that the man was advising her to heed his words so that her brother wouldn't be a vegetable until he died. Zhang Yuan realized that his sister was behind the wall and abruptly jumped up from his bunk, running towards the exit of the room. Zhang Lan was indeed standing outside the door with wet eyes. She was glad that her brother had finally woken up. The girl cried with joy and exclaimed that she was happy to see Zhang Yuan alive and well. She hugged her brother tightly, for just now the doctor had told her that Zhang Yuan would be a vegetable for a long time yet. But Zhang Yuan assured his sister that he was fine. He puzzledly noticed that Junlan now looked like a junior high school girl. But this did not calm the girl, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. She did not believe her brother. After all, he was hit by a car, and how can you feel good about yourself? Zhang Yuan couldn't understand what kind of machine Zhonglan was talking about, because not long ago, he was inside a demon, and his sister was fighting that one. But he looked at the screen. It appeared that he was back in the year 2042, 4 years back to when he'd been in the car accident. Zhang Yuan took a silver lining from what had happened, because now he would be able to take care of Lan Lan, and things would work out differently for them. Then he stroked her cheek to comfort her. Lindong Liang, the commander of the Nighthawks, came up to them and introduced himself. After the man went on to say that the doctor said that the probability of brain death was very high, but Zhang Yuan had not only survived but was in good health. But Zhang Yuan didn't want to communicate with this man. and hit him with the door on the hand that the man held out to him. This gesture confused Lin Dongliang after all. He just wanted to get acquainted. Zhang Yuan walked into the room with his sister and said that you can't mess with Lin Dongliang. Zhang Lan objected. She thought he was a good person who wanted to help her. In the past, when the portal manifested, Zhang Yuan saw him for the first time. The latter was very confused. Yuan would never have thought that Lin Dongliang's team had set their eyes on his sister 4 years ago. Zhang Yuan cautioned his sister because free cheese is only in a mousetrap, and Dongliang wouldn't help her just like that. Zhang Liang said that because of her talent, he hoped she would go to study with him to contribute to society. Zhang Yuan realized that this strange type didn't seem to have time to tell his sister more about everything. He thought it would be better for her not to get involved until college, and she noticed that his brother's hands were very cold and suggested calling a doctor. Zhang Yuan pondered whether there was a way to avoid danger without fighting. After all, when there was a threat, Zhang Lan would simply not be able to take care of himself. His sister was ready to do battle with the green monster, and his brother was helping her from the rear. The best way to keep yourself safe was to fight. Zhang Yuan asked Zhang Lan to help him with the discharge, and he was going to thank Mr. Lin in the meantime. The latter agreed to help her brother, since she was almost done with everything. The brother opened the doors of the ward, and right behind them stood Lin Dongliang. As soon as he took a step, he saw Dongliang right at the door. The man said that he didn't want thanks and wanted to talk. Zhang Yuan hoped that the man hadn't overheard him and Lan Lan's conversation, but everything said otherwise. They moved farther away so they could talk in private. Yuan stated that he wanted to lure Zhang Lan to join his team, and the academy he had invited her to was the perfect place to do so. Lin Dongliang was amazed at his insight. Then brother Zhang Lan said that he knows about the existence of portals, monsters, and that his sister is a genius. He said that Dongliang is a hypocrite, hiding behind his desire to benefit society, trying to kidnap his sister. Lin Dongliang shouted that the guy shouldn't try to make him look like a villain. After all, he was looking for talents that would save humanity. Zhang Yuan then asked if the guy was eavesdropping on their conversation for the sake of humanity, and asked him to stay away. But Dongliang wasn't going to beat around the bush and told her that Zhang Lan's talent could really save humanity, and he hoped the guy would tell her everything and let her take part in saving the world. Zhang Yuan gave permission to enter the academy. This surprised Dongliang, since just now he had told him to stay away. The guy then asked if these things were incompatible and warned him that he had certain conditions. Lin Dongliang started to ask how much money he wanted for the permit, but Zhang Yuan brushed it off. It wasn't that simple, he didn't need money. The guy said that he wanted to accompany his sister to the academy. No matter what she would study or what tasks she would perform, he would be there for her. Zhang Yuan started to leave and lastly said that this was his only condition. He advised him to think it over carefully and assured him that Lan Lan only listened to him and it was useless to try to lure her without his consent. Lin Dongliang pondered, after all, there would be no problem with enrollment. So how could he enroll an ordinary person into the warrior class? He had to do something. Without his consent, he would miss out on Zhang Lan's talent. The brother and sister walked out of the hospital. Zhang Lan wondered if her brother was definitely okay. She noticed that his body was now somehow weak and cold. Zhang Yuan hurriedly reassured her and said that because of the treatment, his arms were all bruised from the injections. That's why he was so weak and cold. And suggested she cook something delicious together at home. The girl got excited and said she wanted pork ribs in sweet and sour sauce and pork feet. Zhang Yuan took a closer look at his bruises. The boy was horrified to discover that it wasn't a bruise at all, but a cadaverous stain. The action takes place at the home of Zhang Yuan and Zhang Lan. The table is set with a variety of main dishes as well as desserts. Zhang Lan eats with great appetite and praises his brother's culinary skills. Zhang Yuan placed the chopsticks on the table, to which Zhang Lan was surprised. The nurse noticed that his brother had no appetite at all after the hospital and that his skin was pale. She suggested that he visit the hospital again. However, Zhang Yuan assured his sister that lack of appetite after a coma was completely normal. The guy went into the kitchen and started washing dishes. While washing dishes, Zhang Yuan thought about how he didn't actually need food and water, as well as sleep and hygiene at all. To top it all off, he pondered another frightening discovery. Zhang Yuan remembered coming to the conclusion that he really did have a cadaverous stain on his arm. At first, he made the assumption that the hospital's equipment had broken, but when he measured his blood pressure at home, he found that he had no pulse. He also failed to take his own temperature. From all of this, the boy concluded that he was indeed dead. The thought made him smile nervously. Zhang Yuan assumed that the only explanation for what was happening was the magic that had incredibly brought him back in time 4 years ago. He imagined himself falling into an abyss. However, the boy couldn't understand how such a thing was even possible. His imagination painted a picture of him lying in a hospital bed. The only thing that reassured him was that the cadaver stains appeared slowly, which meant his secret wouldn't come out until he was readmitted to the hospital. Zhang Yuan received a phone call. On the other end of the line was Lin Dongliang. He told the boy and his sister to come to the academy after the vacation was over. Zhang Yuan was surprised that the man agreed to his condition so easily, but the man irritably remarked that he had a hard time agreeing to fulfill it. Lin Dongliang said that he needed his sister's talents. In his hands he held a rather large red crystal. The man also added that the boy would not be given any special treatment, and that he would definitely be expelled for truancy and poor academic performance. To such terms, Zhang Yuan confidently agreed. The brother and sister approached the academy. Zhang Lan ran ahead of her brother. She was amazed by its beauty and majesty. They approached the statue standing in front of the academy. Zhang Lan was surprised because there was usually a monument of Confucius in front of the academy. Her brother explained to her that this statue was dedicated to the creator of the ability improvement system, who was also the strongest person in the world. From the back, a guy approached them. He identified himself as Se Yi Han, the person in charge of admissions to the special classes. He was also their new classmate. The guy abruptly threw a bag to Zhang Yuan. The guy barely reacted. As if not noticing her brother, Se Yi Han walked over to Jun Lan and handed her a bag with a smile. He explained that it contained school supplies and the watch he had asked her to wear, and offered to walk her to her dormitory. Still not paying attention to Zhang Yuan, the guy told him that there was a sports field and an art gallery on the academy grounds, which was where he had invited Zhang Lan to go. Zhang Yuan took Xie Yihan by the shoulder. He pulled the boy away from his sister and told him they could handle it from here. The brother and sister walked on, leaving their classmate behind. Jun Lan put on her watch and asked her brother to try on his as well. Shi Yihan unhappily clicked his tongue as he looked at them. When Zhang Yuan put on the watch, it greeted its new owner. They also said that military training camp would begin at 1 p.m., so we should finish decorating and gather in front of the athletic field. Xie Yihan's face showed anxiety and confusion. He could not understand what kind of military training camp he was talking about. One of the applicants to the academy swore and threw the watch to the ground in an attempt to smash it so that it would stop beeping. Another guy, sobbing, complained that he was about to have a nervous breakdown. Zhang Yuan assumed that the other freshmen's watches were broken. His sister, on the other hand, said that she understood the guys trying to break their watches, because their sound and vibration got on their nerves. Jun Lan asked her brother why his watch stopped making that annoying sound. He said he just answered, "Got it," and asked her the same question. Jun Lan was embarrassed and covered her mouth with her hand, then recited her request to the clock, folding her hands as if in prayer. After that, according to Zhang Lan, the beeping of the clock stopped. Zhang Yuan was very surprised by this, because he assumed that the clock only responded to keywords. He also thought that the clock was being controlled by some pervert. Someone loudly called out for all the freshmen to gather. It happened so suddenly that it startled Jun Lan. The first-year students lined up in rows. One of them, who was standing next to Zhang Yuan, was relieved when the clock stopped jingling. Zhang Yuan noticed that this freshman was at least 40 years old, from which he concluded that potential was more important than age here. At this moment, a certain woman in front of the freshmen loudly ordered everyone to shut up. The woman said her name was Liu Wen, and that she was the freshman's supervisor, and that they could contact her with any questions, but only after taking the test. She also said that Zhang Lan was exempted from the test due to her age. The others have to sign some kind of documents. A non-matriculated freshman, after reading the text of the contract, was outraged that they were being forced to sign something like this. He queried what the clause meant about the dangers of military training and the lack of responsibility on the part of the academy for accidents. To this, Liu Wen sternly replied that if anyone present was not going to sign the document, they could go to the dean's office and expel themselves. However, she pointed out to the freshmen that after the training, they would become much stronger and be able to absorb crystals more successfully. Upon hearing this, the man immediately began to sign the contract. Zhang Yuan was surprised that a classmate was willing to sacrifice his life for the opportunity to become stronger. While Zhang Yuan was signing the document, he thought about the fact that these crystals seemed to be needed to enhance abilities. But most people's absorption rate was too low. He further thought that since he was already dead, he was in no danger of signing the document, and was also relieved that his sister had been released. However, he doubted whether he would be able to absorb the crystal. At this moment, a man with dark glasses was watching Zhang Yuan. He was evaluating the guy and noticed that he was the only one who signed the document without a second thought, and the only one who answered "received." The students began to load into the transportation. When the cars were almost ready to leave, Zhang Yuan was called over by a man in dark glasses. Zhang Yuan asked what he wanted. The man told the guy to keep an eye on his watch and told him about the possibility of calling for help through it as a reward for reacting correctly to the watch's signal. Suddenly, Zhang Yuan grabbed the man's hand and, boiling over, asked why his sister's watch had also turned off. He replied that he liked her voice and couldn't refuse her. The transportation began to drive away. Zhang Yuan shouted curses and threats to the man as he walked away. The man, looking after him, thought the boy was so grateful to him that he couldn't take his eyes off him. Arriving at the site, the students once again organized themselves into rows. Liu Wen, addressing the students, said that they all had potential, however, until they absorbed the crystal. They were ordinary people, and that this training should show them how fragile human life was. She began to explain that there was a boundary with several energy points at this location, and that the mechanism was like copying space based on the actual terrain. According to her, everything that happens in such a space has no effect on the real world, and that the government is using this technology to grow crystals. She then announced that the students' task was to survive in this place for 3 days, and that they could use the supplies in the backpacks in front of them. Some of the students were surprised that they were being sent on such a test, even though they were still ordinary people. She said that they might not even enter the crystal cultivation area. The main thing was to survive and show their potential. Zhang Yuan thought that this was his chance to obtain such a crystal. Liu Wen also revealed that the watch can be used to signal for help and scare off low-level enemies, but this consumes energy, which the watch has exactly 3 days worth of. Pointing to the portal that opened, the woman called for the students to walk through it if they were ready. When the students were already moving towards the portal, Liu Wen reminded them that students should help each other, and those who were found to have harmed fellow students would be expelled and sent to the tribunal. Zhang Yuan found the woman's last words intimidating, yet he enthusiastically went to the portal. The freshman mentor explained that it is much safer to fight as a team, and reminded them that a team should consist of no more than 6 people. The freshmen divided into teams among themselves. Zhang Yuan asked to be on someone's team but was turned down, citing that they had run out of spots. Some girl asked if Zhang Yuan had found a team and invited him to join her team since there were only 4 of them. But the other 3 members of the team didn't like it and called the girl named Huang Xiaoyan so that she wouldn't be delayed. One of Xiaoyan's team members said that they had no seats. It was a brazen lie since there were only 4 of them, but Zhang Yuan wasn't going to ask for it. This was not a good thing, as it would be much easier to survive as a team. Huang Xiaoyan awkwardly smiled and apologized to the guy. She couldn't go against the entire group for a stranger. Zhang Yuan noticed some man with a backpack watching him from behind the bushes. The man was carefully observing Zhang Yuan's actions. Zhang Yuan suddenly turned off the road and disappeared behind the trees, and the man could no longer watch him. Then he thought that the scariest thing on the planet was man. This really pissed off the entire group that was surreptitiously following Zhang Yuan from behind the bushes. One of those following the guy told Wang Meng, who was standing on a rock, that Zhang Yuan had turned off the path and asked if he had noticed them. From the sheet he was given, he learned a lot. The species that was growing in this place is called snow snake. It takes the temperature into account when choosing a place to hunt. Its attack power is medium. Zhang Yuan read the properties of the crystal. Its quality is very high, as many as 4 skills: super sense of smell, freezing, regeneration, death saving. He was interested in the last ability, but he didn't want her to use it with me. In any case, the first thing to do was to find the snow snake. So Zhang Yuan rushed out to search for it. He began to run through the forest, but this did not last long, for ice appeared under his feet. Zhang Yuan stopped in amazement. After all, it wasn't him who found the snow snake, but she found him. The entire ground around Zhang Yuan was covered in ice, and he saw something amazing. On the tree branch above him, 2 snow snakes slowly crawled. The snow snakes had wrapped their bodies around the entire branch and were now about to fight each other. Zhang Yuan only watched the scene in amazement. Zhang Yuan pulled out his sword so that, in case of emergency, he could fight off the snakes that had unexpectedly caught up with him. Another one crawled up to the 2 snow snakes and they began to coil around each other. The 3 snakes coiled and began to merge into one. Behind Zhang Yuan's back was now a huge, thick snake. Its weight made it fall off the branch. Zhang Yuan swung the tip of his sword at the huge snake and was ready to rush to attack. But the snake did not attack the lad. This surprised him, for wild animals are not docile. It suddenly dawned on him, a snake hunts when it feels warm. So now he was no different from a tree to her. He was dead, and the dead have no body temperature. This gruesome fact made it easier for him to survive. For now, he didn't have to fight the snake. Zhang Yuan, without thinking long, chopped off the head of the huge snake with one precise strike. Blood was oozing from the snake's body, and the head lay separate from everything else. The guy couldn't believe it was so simple, and for good reason. The snake had activated its skill and was now reviving. Zhang Yuan resolutely rushed forward to attack. Since the snake wouldn't die with one strike, he would try to strike a couple more. A crystal glittered at the boy's hand. Zhang Yuan couldn't figure out if it was Xuejing. If someone came out, it was only by dying. About his dead state, the instructor didn't need to know until he absorbed the crystal. Lan Lan is a genius. but his skill is probably not that bad either. So he was going to check it out. An inscription appeared in front of him, asking if Zhang Yuan wanted to absorb him. After being absorbed, one could obtain the following abilities: super perception, ice, regeneration, and immunity to death. The guy was surprised by such a text prompt, but he decided to give it a try. He couldn't die again anyway. Zhang Yuan mentally thought about absorption, and something started to happen to him. The blue vortex lifted him up and enveloped him with the power of a snow snake crystal. All 4 abilities were successfully absorbed by him. Could it be that he was lucky despite being left without a team? A group of freshmen were standing outside a wooden cabin and actively discussing something related to their future plans. A guy narrated that even a strong person in China could only get a 3% success rate of crystal absorption. The girl next to him remarked that this probability was comparable to obtaining a SSR rank skill. With such a probability of success, almost impossible. The other guy told them to forget it, and instead of talking, let them follow the initial plan of finding a couple crystals and returning to the instructor with them. Wang Meng and his team were approaching the guys who were discussing the way forward. One of Wang Meng's guys told the one that they had broken their watches, and the only usable ones were those freshmen. He asked what they would do next. Wang Meng replied that what they managed to take away is their stuff. A guy from Wang Meng's team offered to ask for a watch from a bespectacled guy from a nearby company. Wang Meng gave the order to attack. The academy employee was observing the situation in the area with a very thoughtful face. The boy tisked annoyingly, for he had implied that the watch needed to be used. He stared unhappily at the monitor, wondering how he could call himself a warrior. The academy worker pondered how the man dared to go up into the mountains without the necessary equipment, eyeing the map that marked all the people in the trial area. The freshman curator asked the guy if her charges were fighting amongst themselves. The guy replied that so far they weren't. The girl offered to go to their aid beforehand so that no one would get hurt in the infighting and there would be fewer casualties. The curator's partner grinned evilly. He felt there was no need to interfere right now. The guy leaned back, folded his hands behind his head, and jokingly said that the deaths of a couple of morons would puzzle the court-martial. And then he added that he'd let the freshmen try to fend for themselves. A leaf on the tree was covered in ice. Zhang Yuan, after trying out the ability, realized that he could indeed freeze things for 10 seconds. He concluded that it could help in a critical situation. Next, he tried out the heat vision skill. This way he could sense living things within a 10-meter radius. Zhang Yuan thought that compared to these abilities, immunity from death wasn't that good. He also realized that even though his body temperature had not returned, the cadaverous stains were gone, and the need for glasses was no longer necessary. Zhang Yuan concluded that he could get a couple more crystals, and at the same time, he would get a chance to test a hunch. He kicked the tree and snakes flew from it. The boy struck at the falling snake. His guess was correct. If you cut off the snake's head, it would not be able to regenerate. Another crystal emerged from its remains. The interface suggested that Zhang Yuan absorbed the crystals he received. He agreed. His perception skill had increased to level 3, and his freeze skill had increased to level 2. Zhang Yuan concluded that skills could be pumped with similar crystals, and that one crystal would guarantee one level of pumping. However, he wondered what would happen after the yellow level. The guy decided to kill a few more snakes and see what would happen. Meanwhile, the group following Zhang Yuan hesitated whether to continue the pursuit. However, their leader said they had nothing to fear. One member of the group expressed concern that they would not be able to find their target. Another member of the group noticed the decapitated corpse of a snake and pointed it out to the others. The group members wondered how Zhang Yuan managed to kill the snow snake. The leader assumed that he had used his watch. A member of the group discovered the remains of 3 more snakes. The leader assumed that Zhang Yuan was able to absorb the crystal or was originally prepared for the ordeal. The snake guy who had found the snake suggested leaving Zhang Yuan alone, but the leader wasn't going to back down. He decided that since Zhang Yuan had become stronger, he should eliminate him. Zhang Yuan kicked the wood with his foot. A large number of snakes sprinkled from the tree. Suddenly, Zhang Yuan felt someone approaching. Using his heat detection skill, he realized that there were 5 people surrounding him. He assumed they were the same people who had been following him. The leader of the group called out to Zhang Yuan and offered to surrender. He was holding a long knife in his hand. He said that if Zhang Yuan didn't obey, he would die. The 5 men surrounding Zhang Yuan began to shorten the distance. There were many snakes lying around, however, they did not move. Zhang Yuan looked around. He made the logical conclusion that these people were going to rob him. The guy spread his hands apart and said he didn't have any crystals. The leader of the robbers accused Zhang Yuan of lying, pointing out the large number of dead snakes around. Zhang Yuan confirmed that the snakes were dead, however. He knew that they were actually just stunned. The guy decided to teach the robbers a lesson to stop such actions on the route, and that his sister in the future nothing threatened. Zhang Yuan said that he really didn't have any crystals. To prove the truth of his words, he poured out the contents of his backpack of supplies in front of the robbers. However, that didn't convince the robber leader. He said that they had seen 4 dead snakes on the way here, which meant that Zhang Yuan must have the crystals. To this, the guy replied with a frustrated face that he tried to absorb them, but when he tried to do so, they just disappeared. The leader of the robbers pointed a knife at Zhang Yuan and started accusing him of being stupid. He said that if the absorption procedure was so simple, literally anyone could get into the special class. Zhang Yuan thought about the fact that he should try to avoid getting injured. The leader of the robbers decided that the guy wasn't going to resist, so he could just chase him away and take the crystals from the snakes that were lying around. He made his condition. Zhang Yuan must give them his watch and get out of here. Zhang Yuan agreed and started to take off his watch. After that, he threw them directly onto the ground, swarming with snakes. After fulfilling the demand, Zhang Yuan asked if he could be free. However, one of the robbers demanded that he give them his knife as well. The other robber disagreed, after all. They had already taken everything else from Zhang Yuan. But the leader supported the suggestion to take the knife, fearing that the guy would dare to attack with it. To this, Zhang Yuan replied that of everyone present, he was the only one who wanted conflict and assured that he had no plans to attack anyone. The robber who stood up for Zhang Yuan suggested that he go back to the safe zone. The leader confirmed that there was nothing dangerous on the way there, and that he could wait there for 3 days, as there was food and water, and the task would still be completed. As they left, Zhang Yuan told the robbers that they had better abandon the idea of trying to pursue them. Then the boy stepped on one of the snakes. The snake suddenly regained consciousness and moved. All the snakes woke up and quickly crawled towards the group of robbers that encircled Zhang Yuan's watch. The leader of the robbers reached for his watch. One of the robbers praised him for pulling it off so well, while the other was worried that Zhang Yuan might come back when he found out that they had lied about the food and water. Meng, the leader of the robbers, didn't care because he didn't have any weapons, so he couldn't do anything to them. He looked at the battery charge and saw that the charge on them was almost full. He realized that Zhang Yuan didn't use the watch to suppress snakes. The robbers looked around and realized they were trapped, for the snakes surrounded them on all sides. Meng rushed out in a panic and urged everyone else to do the same. The robbers shouted loudly for help. Even the birds sitting in the trees nearby flew away from them. Zhang Yuan walked forward confidently, not paying any attention to the shouts, thinking that the robbers shouldn't have messed with him. The 2 freshmen set off and they almost came to the snake's nest. Along the way, they stumbled upon Zhang Yuan, to which they were very surprised. Huang Xiaoyan ran up to the guy and asked him how he got here, to which Zhang Yuan said that he was robbed. Xiaoyan worriedly asked the man if he was injured. Zhang Yuan assured the girl that he was fine. Zhang Yuan told them that after they tried to rob him, went to kill the monsters, they must have already finished. The guy from Huang Xiaoyan's team grabbed that one by the arm and said that they should hurry up before they killed everyone. But the girl objected. They couldn't just abandon Zhang Yuan like that. The boy tisked annoyingly. Zhang Yuan would only distract them. The freshman said hello to Zhang Yuan and began to talk about their team. Zhang Yuan asked the one not to bother. He knew the one didn't want him to join. He knew that if he didn't eat and drink, it would arouse suspicion. So he needed to make sure not to slip up, and it wasn't very convenient to kill monsters without a knife. Zhang Yuan stated to them that he would go with them to retrieve the backpack and then immediately leave afterward. The boys came to a clearing and saw all the people in it immobilized by hungry snow snakes. One, shrouded head to toe in snakes of the defeated crew, begged those for help. But the snakes let him finish speaking, and he fell to the ground from the snow reptile's many bites. Huang Xiaoyan covered her mouth in amazement at the sight, while her partner couldn't understand where there were so many snakes coming from. Almost all of Wang Meng's team was dead, except for Wang Meng himself, who had fought back so far. Huang Xiaoyan, along with her partner, rushed away from this clearing. In the process, she asked why Zhang Yuan wasn't running, but her partner impatiently dragged her further. Zhang Yuan grabbed his knife from the floor and wondered if they were so frightened by a bunch of snakes, looking at the fleeing people in their wake. Zhang Yuan resolutely walked with his knife towards the snakes that were still biting Wang Meng's body. He jokingly said that he thought no one would mind if he killed them. There was no one to object anymore. With one super fast strike, he pierced through all the snakes that were on the breathless body. When he had collected all the stones from the snakes' bodies, Zhang Yuan proceeded to the absorption stage to improve his abilities. After that, a clue appeared in front of him. Super perception increased to green level 2. Ice, green level 3. Regeneration, yellow level 3. Immunity to death could not be improved. Zhang Yuan felt a surge of strength from the improvement. Zhang Yuan thought about the fact that 10 crystals were now needed to improve a level from yellow to green. Vidiso, the further improvement would follow the same principle. The probability of a single crystal skill was confirmed. He pumped freezing to green level 3, but regeneration remained yellow. Apparently some force was preventing him from improving it. Surely the others must think that a mere human cannot absorb a crystal. Mere humans just have crystals vaporize after a failed absorption. He wondered if everyone could see the same clues as he did. Zhang Yuan decided to try out his new abilities and applied the freeze to all the surviving snakes that 2 more bodies had. The guy clearly understood that he shouldn't give away the amount of crystals he had absorbed, but he was uneasy about the dead students. The freshman curator remarked that this was nothing new. In situations like this, it is customary to summon the instructor with a watch, and all the trouble falls on that one's shoulders. At that moment, the device beeped. The curator asked her partner if she could help any of the guys who had sent the signal. The partner responded by saying that they were in no danger. They didn't know they were being monitored. Afterwards, he suggested we make a little show out of it. The curator's partner asked Huang Xiaoyan and the guy from her team if this was the murder scene. They answered in the affirmative. An academy worker was examining the crime scene. He found that most of the wounds were snake bites, but there was also 1 stab wound, 3 watches, one of which had a dead battery. The freshman mentor's partner made a point of judging the crime scene. He continued to replay the events on the battlefield based on the evidence, aided by the computer. In the past, Wang Meng's team used Soundwave, but it could only scare away the snow snakes. All of Meng's guys were in a panic. They didn't know what to do. Then Wang Meng ordered them to turn on the watches they had taken from the students. But the team wasn't going to wait on the spot for help, and they ran away, abandoning their leader. The horde of snakes was rapidly overtaking the fugitives, who were trying to avoid death at all costs. One guy on Wang Meng's team asked why those snakes were so fast. To this, Wang Meng said, but did not finish, that it doesn't matter if you run slower than the snake. Wang Meng put a knife in the back of one of his buddies to save his own skin, because the snakes would swarm onto this guy's body first. As he ran away, Wang Meng finished his phrase. The main thing is that I should run faster than her. And it worked. Some of the snakes switched to the guy. The curator's partner realized that Zhang Yuan had led them directly to the snake nest and indirectly killed them with those very snakes. He kept noticing new details, for if he looked around, there were at least 30 snakes. But something didn't add up in his calculations. So why didn't they attack Zhang Yuan himself? This detail interested him, because he hadn't noticed him using anything. The guys observed the pensive expression on the academy employee's face and decided to ask what had happened. He said that he had found out what was wrong and that the military training was continuing. The curator's partner rather remarked that Zhang Yuan had enough cunning, courage, and cold calculation. That was something he really liked about this interesting guy. He made a promise to himself that if Zhang Yuan returned alive, he would settle this matter for him. The action took place in the academy cafeteria. Lindong Liang asked Zhang Lan, who was having lunch, how her first day at the academy went. Lan Lan quite said that the campus was beautiful. The dormitory was huge and the teachers were kind. As she ate the pudding, she added that the food in the canteen was delicious, and she liked everything. Lindong Liang held out a phone to the girl and said that this phone had a satellite function. She would be able to keep in touch with it no matter where she was. But Zhang Lan capriciously turned away and refused, reasoning that her brother had told her not to take anything from the hands of strangers. This reaction was a surprise to Dong Liang. Lindong Liang agreed that her brother was right. But he added that it was not a gift, but a loan, so when she earned money for a new one, she would return it to him and buy a new one for herself. Zhang Lan happily grabbed the phone from the table and said that in such a case, it was okay to not be modest. Lindong Liang asked her where her brother was now and why he wasn't having lunch with her. Lan Lan was cautiously and anxiously told that Zhang Yuan was currently at a military training camp. This answer put Lindong Liang in a stupor. Who would think of sending an ordinary person to a military training camp? What was this academy thinking? After all, if anything happened to him, Zhang Lan would hate him to death. Lindong Liang jumped up from the table and told Lan Lan that he had one call to make. Zhang Lan asked lastly if military training was dangerous and asked for her brother's return soon. But Lindong Liang hurriedly reassured her and said that it wasn't dangerous at all and Zhang Yuan would be back soon. But mentally, he hoped that he was fine. The curator was sitting at a table with a man. He asked her if the guy with glasses had come with her. The girl asked him not to call her partner that. The freshman curator went on to say that he was here to observe the military training camp, not to shine his face. Finally, a guy in a uniform approached them. The guy said hello and introduced himself as Feng Mo from Team Feng Lun. He said that he had come here for a mission and asked if the commander was here. The curator's face changed, for this was the guy who was ranked 68th on the list. He was here for the mission, but why hadn't she been notified of the postponement of the military exercise? The girl introduced herself as Liu Wen. She was an instructor at the academy and was in charge of military training. Feng Mo said that his mission was to rescue the student Zhang Yuan. He asked if they knew his location. Feng Mo replied that based on the latest information, Zhang Yuan had gone to the safe zone, but never returned. After receiving the information, the man immediately went to look for him. Liu Wen was surprised as the military training was going smoothly. The man opposite, however, said that he knew something about Feng Mo. He said that Feng Mo's brother was sick and could only be cured by the snow snake crystal. That was the reason why he was transferred here. He was also suffering from a severe form of facial blindness. Feng Mo navigated the map on his phone and headed towards the snow snake's lair. He thought that as long as the drill was being monitored, everything would be fine. Looking at the map, he pondered that as he moved further down the road, he would definitely come to the snake lair. Feng Mo came across the shredded and refreshed corpse of a snow snake. He was surprised that one of the freshmen would wield a knife like this. Behind the bushes, Feng Mo noticed Zhang Yuan, who was swinging his knife at this moment. Zhang Yuan was actively working the huge cleaver. Several nicks had already appeared on its blade. Feng Mo was very surprised at such a picture. He didn't understand how such an excellent weapon like the Academy knife could be handled so carelessly. Feng Mo approached Zhang Yuan from the back and told him that if a knife could, he would have already cried from such treatment. Zhang Yuan was surprised by the man's appearance and started asking him questions: who he was, what he was doing here, and why he cared what he was doing with the knife. Such a thing made Feng Mo aghast, thinking that any other person in such a situation would be ashamed and leave. Zhang Yuan, on the other hand, pressed further. He said that the Academy had only given him this knife, and that if the man was not satisfied with something, he could give him something else. To this, Feng Mo gave the guy a brand new knife. However, he set a condition. Zhang Yuan looked at his new acquisition with admiration. The man's condition was that he could keep the snake that Zhang Yuan had gutted, but the rest of the snakes would go to Feng Mo. Zhang Yuan was very surprised and asked if Feng Mo was ashamed of taking the loot from the freshman. The man replied that this wasn't Zhang Yuan's territory, and that the rule of first up is first down didn't work here. Feng Mo threw his spear at the snake sitting in the tree with great strength and speed. The man hit the snake exactly in the head, nailing it to the tree. After that, Feng Mo told Zhang Yuan that the snakes should go to the strongest. A blue glow came from where the spear hit. Zhang Yuan watched the man's actions in surprise. Watching Feng Mo kill the snake with one, Zhang Yuan concluded that this guy was definitely a professional. He saw his weapon that was similar to the one Lan Lan had used in her past life. It was an official equipment. Feng Mo contentedly told Zhang Yuan that he could see their difference in strength himself. Zhang Yuan realized that there was something wrong here after all. An experienced warrior had come to fight monsters side by side with rookie students. The guy used his freezing ability on Feng Mo and he was now imprisoned in a huge block of ice. Zhang Yuan threw himself at the imprisoned guy to break the ice and thus injure him. The boy pounded the ice clot as hard as he could, but it wouldn't budge. Zhang Yuan couldn't understand why there was such a high density. His bones were about to turn to dust, and Feng Mo hadn't even been hit once. He decided to leave him here for now since he didn't look like a villain. There was nothing more he could do. Zhang Yuan picked up Feng Mo's tool from the ground and told him to sit there for a while he kindly used this knife. With one light blow, he punched through the snake's head. The weapon was far better than his knife. As he left, he decided to gloat and allowed me to use his weapon on the condition that he would be sure to return it later. Feng Mo stood in the middle of the forest lawn, imprisoned in a block of ice. Someone was shivering as they approached the treehouse. It was Feng Mo, who was covered in abrasions. He walked while leaning on his wand and looked at the academy worker hatefully. The curator's partner asked Feng Mo if it was Feng Mo because the guy was in a very pitiful state. The guy laughed at the fact that someone had managed to beat up Feng Mo. The wounds were small, but the humiliation was immense. Plus, the academy worker noticed that his weapon had been stolen as well. Feng Mo told the guy to heal him. The curator's partner used his healing ability. Ability returned to the sun. The target returns to the state it was in 24 hours ago. The academy employee asked him to tell him about his misfortunes, thus pleasing his soul. Feng Mo told him what had happened to him. The curator's partner surprisingly asked him if it was true that one of the students had stolen his weapon. Feng Mo answered in the affirmative, but the curator's partner couldn't detect the clock signal. The guy said that currently, the only disciple currently wearing a watch is Zhang Yuan, but his watch was taken by Wang Meng. He asked if Feng Mo didn't get a good look at the person he fought with. The academy employee said that he should now focus on the initial task. Feng Mo asked if the guy could track down Zhang Yuan's whereabouts. The curator's partner answered in the affirmative, but asked him if the target wasn't the snow snake crystals. Feng Mo said that it was all his target. Wang Meng was desperately talking to himself about how he hadn't met a single living snake in the entire 2 days. He was also lost. He began to think that he was cursed. Wang Meng ran into the sign again that there was no further passageway. It was strange that wherever he went, there were repairs everywhere. The guy rushed to look for another road. Feng Mo had been following him the whole time. Feng Mo stood with another sign about road repair. He apologized to him, because Wang Meng would have to wander around the forest longer to get more crystals. Feng Mo said that in any case, beginners like them didn't need these crystals anyway. Zhang Yuan, meanwhile, checked the map and looked for another snow snake crystal. He came to a spot on the map, but the entire nest of snakes at that spot had been exterminated. Zhang Yuan wondered what kind of livestock could have killed all those snakes. Zhang Yuan climbed up a tree and saw a mountain. This mountain wasn't on the map that was given out at the academy. He was going to try his luck there. Zhang Yuan easily chopped another snow snake. Having gotten this far, a couple snakes he had found after all, and now he could improve his abilities once more. Perception range improved to 1 kilometer. Freezing time increased to 2 minutes. With enough energy, it can be used several times, so the time can be increased to hours. Due to my lack of feeling hungry, thirsty, and tired, I was a little lost in time. I think it was time for him to go back. A huge snow snake crawled near his foot. His spear froze after a blue reptile crawled near its tip. She had an unusually huge muzzle compared to the other individuals of her species, and she hissed whistlingly. A huge snake coiled from above Zhang Yuan, who couldn't help but notice such a huge reptile. Zhang Yuan shouted at it to see why it was hiding here. The snake opened its mouth and swung at the guy. Zhang Yuan was surprised at this speed of the snow giant snake. Its mouth was already in front of his face. The snake gave a sudden strike with its tail, right on Zhang Yuan's abdomen. Zhang Yuan used his regeneration ability, which was very well pumped. The boy realized that he himself would definitely not be able to handle such a giant. This serpent was stronger than all his kin. He didn't know if his new freeze would work on such a huge snow serpent, but there were no more options. Zhang Yuan thrust his hand forward and used the improved freezing ability on the serpent. The head and part of the monster's torso froze, contrary to Zhang Yuan's fears. Zhang Yuan couldn't believe his eyes. His ability had actually worked, but one had to try again to completely immobilize him. The guy quickly applied freeze 4 more times on different sides of the snow snake. Zhang Yuan struck the frozen snake with great force with his spear. Along with the ice, the T-snake cracked. This couldn't help but make Zhang Yuan happy. The boy rushed with renewed vigor to destroy the ice with the snake. He injured it all over its torso and got to its head. The damage may not be high, but he could do some serious damage because the weapon was excellent. After so many freezes he'd used, his strength was almost at an end. He'd almost shattered his head, so he didn't have to worry about immunity to death. Zhang Yuan realized that the snake crystal was still intact, and the immunity to death could work. The freshman mentor announced that there was still half an hour until the end of the assembly. She asked all returning students to come to her to register. Wang Meng stood and grabbed onto the tree. He could not catch his breath. It was a miracle that he managed to get out. Feng Mo told him behind his back that he had successfully followed him from the mountain itself to make sure he reached the camp. An employee of the academy came up to them and said that Feng Mo had made a mistake again, and the person he was accompanying was not Zhang Yuan at all. Feng scratched his chin and asked, "Wasn't this the person the coordinates were given by the curator's partner?" The academy employee explained that the coordinates belonged to Zhang Yuan's watch, but as for why Zhang Yuan's watch was on another student was unknown. The curator's partner approached the frightened Wang Meng and motioned for the man to come with him. He decided to give him a chance to explain everything. The snow serpent was chopped into many pieces, but it was still trying to regenerate with its abilities. Zhang Yuan definitely understood that even though he was actually a corpse and very tired, but this thing was also working hard to recover. Finally, out of his last strength, he managed to reach the huge snow serpent crystal. The exhausted Zhang Yuan thought happily that it was finally over and the snake was dead. The clue appeared in front of him again, but now there was a new ability called Ice Blood Blast. During it, all abilities improved by 1,200% for 30 seconds. But after using it, he was weak for 48 minutes. What he read made him exhale in relief. He was lucky that the snake didn't have time to use this ability. This kind of power was definitely worth absorbing by Zhang Yuan. Wang Meng tearfully begged that he die here in peace and not be court-martialed. Feng Mo asked the academy worker if he had given Wang Meng's coordinates on purpose. The guy said that he was just providing the information he needed. Feng Mo then accused him of giving him the wrong coordinates. At the same time, Wang Meng was being led away by the military, but he resisted in every possible way. He did not want to be court-martialed. The curator's partner asked if the coordinates he gave were important. Afterwards, he said that the only thing that mattered was that Zhang Yuan still hadn't shown up. It seemed like he had Feng Mo's weapon. The freshman curator looked questioningly at the guy who wasn't going to leave. He said to take the students to the academy, and he would wait for Zhang Yuan. Then they would return in Mr. Feng's car. Feng Mo said that it was already 10 o'clock and they should pack. Afterward, he asked if the guy would just let them go back. The academy employee asked what was the big deal, and if the guy wanted to make a showdown in front of the instructor. The assistant instructor said that he liked this guy, so don't let him go overboard in trying to get revenge. but Feng Mo replied that it was because of his abilities that he was alive, so he wouldn't kill Zhang Yuan. The latter advised him not to train much for now. The academy employee was doing work on his gadget, and Feng Mo was doing push-ups to make the waiting time worthwhile. It had already been 4 hours since then, but the guys hadn't changed their position, and Feng Mo was still practicing. Evening came. The academy worker was now just sitting pensively, and Feng Mo was now carrying a barbell. The curator's partner was angry because it was already 7 o'clock and he didn't think he would have to wait so long. Feng Mo tried to calm him down, but he refused to calm down and wanted to kill Zhang Yuan himself. Feng Mo asked him not to be nervous. After all, nerve cells don't regenerate, but he threatened to kill Zhang Yuan even if he died. Zhang Yuan approached the guys and was surprised that no one had come yet. He asked if he had come too early. At that time, Zhang Yuan thought that he had really come very early and said that if he had known, he would have still walked around. Feng Mo's spear was in a terribly deplorable state, as he had chopped the Snow Kite King with it. Feng Mo became very tense and asked what he could have done to his weapon that it was in such a bad condition. Zhang Yuan replied that he had done nothing of the sort. After all, he deliberately didn't want to mess up the weapon. A slimy magical shadow enveloped him and he couldn't move. The weapon was a very precious item to Feng Mo. He swung for a strike and shouted for the man to die. Zhang Yuan was exhausted and fell down from Feng Mo's powerful punch. The academy worker said that he had hit the guy too hard and should have hit him lighter after all. What would he do if he died? Feng Mo asked if the guy wasn't going to kill him himself. Zhang Yuan was exhausted and fell down from Feng Mo's powerful punch. The academy worker said that he had hit the guy too hard and should have hit him lighter after all. What would he do if he died? Feng Mo asked if the guy wasn't going to kill him himself. Zhang Yuan was thrown back as much as 10 meters. It seems this shadow has a range of action as well. The guy thought that he should find a way to keep his distance from Feng Mo. At this time, the guys were talking about something. Then they approached, and the academy worker said that Zhang Yuan was the reason why snakes had bitten his comrades, and he had all the proof. Feng Mo started to play along and offered to tie him up. Zhang Yuan remembered that one of them had been poaching during the exercise, and the other hadn't said a word to him. He concluded that they were conspiring and wanted to kill him. The guy decided not to wait for them to attack and took the safety off his gun. Zhang Yuan started shooting at Feng Mo and the academy worker, but their protective field didn't let the bullets through. Feng Mo told the guy to give up. After all, there was no way he could break through his defense. But Zhang Yuan was not going to give up. The curator's partner asked the one if he seriously thought that they couldn't, because Zhang Yuan had nowhere to go. Feng Mo wondered if he had any trumps up his sleeve. The academy employee decided to threaten Zhang Yuan's most precious possession. He said that after he died, Zhang Yuan would be his. Zhang Yuan was like an electric shock. He immediately jumped up and had new strength to fight. The guy sent a pile of ice chunks at them as a warning, and said if they touched his sister, he'd wipe them into powder. Feng Mo asked why he had said such a thing, because now they would be in trouble. Zhang Yuan decided to use Ice Snake Blast. His perception, freezing, and regeneration abilities improved. Additionally, he gained the ability of Heat Shock, Ice Coating, and Immortal Ghost. These enhancements would only last 30 seconds, but it didn't matter. He would take full advantage of that time. Zhang Yuan used the ice ability on the guys. Those guys didn't have time to do anything. Feng Mo was, but it didn't transfer to the academy worker thanks to the protective field. He began to restore his partner's strength, using his abilities. The freshman curator's partner was amazed at such a guy's strength. If it wasn't for Feng Mo's defense, there wouldn't be a single bit left of them. The academy worker decided to use the Return to the Sun ability to unfreeze Feng Mo, but the ambient temperature was too low and everything froze in just seconds. Zhang Yuan realized that this skill required a lot of energy, and he had lost almost all of his strength in a single use. Therefore, it was impossible to procrastinate. After their defense field was destroyed, he grabbed the gun and pointed the muzzle directly at them. But the gun was covered in ice. It was over. The gun was frozen too, and he couldn't pull the trigger. It looked like he had exhausted his luck. His body was half frostbitten. Zhang Yuan fell to the ground, still saying that even if he died, he wouldn't let anything happen to his sister. Feng Mo couldn't believe that the enhancement could increase the damage by as much as 448, because anything higher than 448 was a kryptonite ability, and Zhang Yuan had just exceeded that power. The academy worker asked him to help him, but my partner, as soon as he got up, he fell right back down. The academy worker finally rose up, used the Return to the Sun ability on Zhang Yuan. He couldn't let him go so easily after all. He still had plans for Zhang Yuan. Feng Mo told Feng Qing that Feng Qing was a jerk and why he couldn't, not to go looking for trouble. He's the reason he got involved in this. The action takes place in a hospital. There was a flat line on the bedside screen. The doctors around him couldn't believe he was beyond saving. His temperature had dropped. His heartbeat and blood pressure were gone. That technique had ruined him. The doctors were about to send him to the morgue, but Feng Qing ran into the room and told them to stop. The doctors didn't recognize the guy without his glasses. Feng Qing escorted the doctors out of the room and said that he was just in a state of anabiosis. Feng Mo asked if he was sure because he had noticed the body stains on Zhang Yuan. He wanted to see where he had seen the body stains. Feng Qing once again used the Return to the Sun ability and contentedly said that everything was fine now, and it was a couple of bruises. Feng Mo asked if the man was telling the truth, but Feng Qing couldn't tell for sure whether he was dead or alive. On Feng Qing's phone, there was a list of freshmen and Jin Yuan was signed with another made-up name. Feng Mo asked, "Isn't this ridiculous?" But Feng Qing said that Zhao Yuan had beaten up the one twice. If his real name appears, then they would not be in trouble. Feng Mo said that the one will tell why he is under a different name. Zhang Yuan, who was lying on the bed unconscious now, complained that it was very noisy. The guy lifted himself up and sat on the bed and shouted at Feng Mo and Feng Qing to shut up. Feng Qing was right that the guy was in anabiosis, and Feng Mo gave him the money. Zhang Yuan didn't understand why they had become so friendly. Zhang Yuan received a message from his sister who was worried about his brother. Zhang Lan told him that she was doing well at the academy and he didn't have to worry. Now the guy realized that he had been unconscious for 2 days, and it was a miracle he hadn't been sent to the morgue. Feng Qing introduced himself and said that he was the president of the student union. Afterwards, he apologized to the boy, because he had said careless words about his sister. Feng Qing said that although they were strangers, but on behalf of the student union, he invited him to join them. Zhang Yuan asked him, hadn't they known each other before? Zhang Yuan got up from the bed and punched Feng Qing in the jaw, sparing no effort. The boy sat on the floor in shock at Zhang Yuan's actions. Zhang Yuan then extended his hand in a friendly manner and said that they definitely knew each other now. Junlan was sitting in the office near the freshman curator. Lin Dongliang was reassuring the girl it wouldn't be a big deal if she made a mistake. Lin Dongliang told her to just take the crystal in her hands and try to feel the energy contained within. The curator told the girl to try it. The probability of successfully absorbing the crystal is a bare statistic. In fact, it all depends on a person's talent and mental state. The curator mentally encouraged the girl. This world is full of monsters. Only warriors can defeat them. Lan Lan knew that the reason why Uncle Lin was so kind to her and her brother was because he was counting on her. Jun Lan wanted to protect the world and her brother. A clue appeared in front of her that she had opened a fire cloud in front of her. It would take 20 years of her life to absorb it. Jun Lan finally met her brother and jumped up happily. He had scared the hell out of her with his disappearance. Lan Lan noticed her brother's new uniform. Zhang Yuan revealed that he had joined the student union and became a member of the disciplinary faculty. Zhang Yuan had heard from Feng Qing that there would be a week's vacation after military training. He must have been put into this class for a reason. After all, Lan Lan had gotten in because of his talent, and they had definitely negotiated some conditions for him. Zhang Yuan asked if the instructor had done anything special for her while he was away. Zhang Lan hesitated and said that there didn't seem to be anything like that, but Uncle Lin had given her a fire cloud crystal to absorb. This statement surprised Zhang Yuan. Lan Lan boasted that she was now the strongest warrior and would protect her brother. Zhang Yuan thought unhappily that even in this life, Lan Lan could not escape the fate of the team leader. All he could do was to become stronger to protect her. The girl was naively offended and asked her brother why he didn't ask what ability she got. Zhang Yuan asked what ability she got. Zhang Lan replied, super speed and heavenly origin. Zhang Yuan turned his head for her to explain, but his sister was already a decent distance away from him. Zhang Lan told him to watch what she was about to demonstrate to him and ran up to the statue. The girl snapped the huge statue in half with one swift kick of her foot. Lan Lan asked her brother if she was tough. Zhang Yuan said that she had gotten stronger, but it wouldn't save her from being liable for damaging public property. Zhang Lan had to write an explanatory letter for the mayhem she had caused to demonstrate strength. The freshman curator tiredly put her hand to her forehead and said it was fine, but asked her not to break anything else. The girl promised she wouldn't do it again and said goodbye. Zhang Yuan noticed that there wasn't even any need to pay, and it was an overly generous gesture. But the curator stopped Zhang Yuan and said that he had done well in the military training camp, and afterwards she suggested that he try to absorb the crystal with her help. Zhang Yuan thanked her for her kindness, but he didn't think he needed her help. Afterward, he was surprised that Feng didn't tell her anything. The girl put a hand to her face and sighed. She thought that even though he wasn't interested in it, there was no need to make it so obvious. But something distracted her from those thoughts. The guy was wearing a student council uniform, and Feng Qing was going to find a successor at the training camp. The curator wondered if he had chosen Zhang Yuan for this role. The building looked tall, reminiscent of a gymnasium. where the windows are also wide to allow sunlight to pass into the room for better illumination. 3 guys were heading somewhere, one of them asking for a room for one. Addressing the student council president, a young man walking beside him, who was considering the hall. The guy looked disgruntled, addressing one of them with a reminder that he had promised to teach them how to handle weapons, asking when they would start already. One of them answered him that the training would start right now, right next to him. The guy enthusiastically wanted to watch him. Various martial training items were lying on the floor. A sword lay on top of the nunchucks, and another weapon was thrown on top of the sword. The guy was lying down holding his weapon. He said he needed to rest. The guy lying facing the floor was holding a sword, replying that he needed to heal as soon as possible. He looked down at his hands, mouthing what he felt touching him. So-called coach milled about eating and getting back to practicing. The boys were lying on the floor tiredly, discussing the latter guy, asking him how he didn't feel tired and that he had no talent for weapons. The guy looked very tired, having no energy for anything. He further spoke for Yuan that he had no skills in any weapons. Yuan returned with the drinks, and turning to them, began throwing cans in their direction. One of them started to catch it, and easily caught the can of refreshment in his hands. The guy opened the can, pointing it towards his mouth, and with satisfaction on his face started drinking from it. Having drunk the contents, the bottle in his hands shrank. He squatted down at once, and with an animated face said he was alive. Yuan approached them, saying then it was worth continuing. His words made the 2 guys scared. The lively man asked for another jar. The young man stepped on the jar they had just drunk from with his shoe, replying to them to give them more rest then. Stepping back a long distance, Yuan's back pointed the very same jar to the trash can. The guys looked confused. Their facial expressions looked shocked. They thought that suddenly it was his hidden talent, because the guy hit from practically 10 meters away. The guy with a surprised face took 2 cans in his hands, shoving them into Yuan's hands, telling him to throw 2 cans at once. He complied with his request by throwing 2 beverage cans into the trash can from the same distance he was. The young man, expressing delight, grabbed his hand, saying that it was his hidden weapon. Yuan asked him if it was as beautiful as a sword. He pondered, thinking over the guy's words, saying that a weapon wouldn't be necessary if you used a rage attack. The big dragon-looking monster ran at full speed while people threw some sticks at it. They were sitting in a circle. The guy was telling for that monster. One of them inquired further, and the guy replied that he was handed over to the government. Yuan needed the royal crystal. The fellow looked with interest, addressing him and saying that he could not teach him how to use a gun, and as compensation, he would settle his question. He stood up, heading off in the distance, saying where he was going and asked if he could send a letter to the academy's address. Yuan gave an affirmative answer. The guy looked disgruntled, turning to the other to ask if he looked like some kind of demon in his buddy's eyes. He easily replied that he wasn't afraid of him. The guy's gaze was focused, holding the jar with his hand. He flailed about the snow snake crystals. The patient's arm was in burns. Near it was a box held by the handles. Inside were snow snake crystals. The visitor was talking to the patient, telling him that he hoped these crystals would help. The man was silent. The guy started heading towards the exit of the room, further talking to him. He was willing to do anything to get his last name back. The man could not speak, but thought to himself in his head that there was no way he needed their last name, because they had made him sick. The IV tube slightly staggered. Something sinister appeared around the man's body. With a blue aura wrapping around him like tentacles, he did not react in any way to such a guest. A large hand began to form from this aura. Holding the crystal from the box the man was looking at in his fingers, he decided to take them after all. The monster-like fingers opened up. Above the air was a crystal, throwing its power out across the room. The man looked at it all. Now he had gained the ability to be immune to death. His gaze immediately changed, realizing what it was. Looking further behind the scene, the man's expression looked shocked. The courier was dressed in a special uniform worn by employees at his job. With courtesy, he handed the box to the man, imploring him to remember to put a good review. The guy took the box in his hands, agreeing to his words. The courier began to get on his transport, still kindly telling him to turn to him, in addition to receiving a 20% discount. Yuan opened the box right on the spot. It contained shining yellow crystals. On it was a note. The guy milled about whether it was badger crystals, paying attention to the leaf. The guy unfolded the note, which was treated as if the former people had met again. It stated the place of meeting. It was a fishing wharf, with the date given as September 15th with a time of 8 o'clock in the evening. Yuan looked at the piece of paper with wonder, pondering to himself what to do with it, coming to questions of whether it was a love letter and what kind of woman it was. With seriousness, he pondered further, asking himself if he should approach his buddy. A picture appeared in his mind of his friend laughing while holding his phone, taking a picture of the letter, after which his decision was negative. Covering his face with his hand, holding the box with one hand, the guy decided to forget about that note and the option to turn to his friend. telling himself that he would give it to him himself the next time he saw him. His hand reached for the box of crystals, pulling one brightly colored ball out of the box, drawing it to him. He held the crystal in his hands. A yellow-orange aura appeared around it. Hovering around it, Yuan began to ponder over this crystal, remembering all of its components. The guy confidently made the decision to absorb everything. A hand stuck out from his body, taking the orb to himself. The box was already standing on the table, also manifesting an aura. Yuan's hand reached for the hilt of the sword that was beside him. In his thoughts, he activated the rage strike. The sword manifested the same light as the crystals it absorbed. The guy swung the weapon across the room, changing his position with incredible speed. He stopped, holding the sword closer to his face, and as he looked at it in amazement, he realized what the sword was for. A sign was hanging on the door, saying that this room was a conference room for the student council. Someone was shouting inside the room that they disagreed with Zhang Yuan's entry. Lei Bo was displeased, holding his fist in the air, addressing his interlocutors, asking how someone like Yuan could join, still as a member of the disciplinary committee. The girl turned to him and began to reassure him, saying that the president had only taken the guy to run errands, one of them crossing his arms over his chest, not considering her words as truth. Zheng Ruo also looked displeased, making statements that the disciplinary committee members should have strength and manners. He absolutely disagreed with such a decision. As a former member of that committee, the guy asked him to explain himself. Shan Guanyi clenched his fist and with a high intonation began to tell Yuan to join them, but only as an assistant. In the classroom, students sat at their desks, listening to the teacher's lecture about when a crystal can become a crystal. Yuan raised his hand, asking the teacher if a crystal appears after a person dies. The teacher replied to him that it was impossible to compare the structure of humans with other races, asking what would happen if one absorbed a crystal and gave birth to a child. The man sighed heavily, muttering that pregnant women shouldn't do such things, asking others not to get carried away with such thoughts. The boy was sitting next to his sister, staring off into the distance while he put more food in her tray and told her she should eat more as she was growing up. The girl said she was not a child. A guy walked over to them, holding a tray of food in his hand, addressing Yuan, reminding him that his sister was nicer than she was still being talked about. He snorted at him with malevolence, reminding the third-year student for taking a step to the side. The guy only said in peace that he still had to wait for her adulthood. Such words made the young man's face look angry, and in his hands, from his emotions, he broke his chopsticks. The third-year student asked him if it was really his sister. She grabbed his hand with a pleasant smile on her face, telling him it was true while Yuan still looked displeased. A picture of his brother and sister riding on a train appeared in his mind. There was a beautiful scenery outside the window. The guy blushed heavily, interpreting it in his head as Jun's release. Yuan, from his facial expression, slapped him a good slap, yelling about what the student union president was even thinking. The guy went flying, and the girl asked with interest what that meant. The guy held onto the table with his hands, silently telling Yuan that it was only a joke. The girl immediately recognized him from his voice. After all, she had talked to him on the phone when her brother was in the hospital. He agreed with her. The sister said with courtesy and a little concern that because of the broken glasses, Feng Qing might hurt himself. He said that without them, he only scares people. The girl wanted to take a look. Feng decided to make an exception for her sake, and removing his broken glasses from his eyes, they were purple and glowing, as if in the darkness they could be the only source of light. His sister looked at him with admiration, telling him that his eyes were beautiful. Yuan looked at him with interest and asked if it was some kind of talent. Feng put his glasses back on his eyes, telling his story about his mother being unable to absorb the crystal when she was 3 months pregnant, causing him to absorb it, becoming a true warrior. The boy began to mull over his words, recalling the teacher's speech when he said that such things were strictly forbidden. Feng enthusiastically warned the guy that he was now a member of the disciplinary committee and was joining the patrol at lunchtime. Yuan looked puzzled, asking if he was going to be kicked out, to which the guy turned to his sister. He looked serious as he mouthed that a friend was almost never at the academy. But there was something going on in the alliance right now. Without going into details, Feng mouthed that he would help him. His sister was still admiring him, telling her brother that she would go on patrol with him. Yuan looked at her, reminding her that his sister still had class. The girl almost crying, not wanting to go to class. He had a bandage on his arm, saying that he was the new member of the disciplinary committee. The guy's face looked serious, and the girls beside him were whispering. Yuan was following somewhere. In his thoughts, he thought he felt someone following him, making the decision to retreat to a secluded place for their showdown. There were indeed some persons behind the guy. They continued to follow him further, the guy passing by students who could follow to another room for class or home. Yuan was still walking ahead. He turned sharply towards them, looking shrewdly at them and addressing them for an appointment to meet, which would take place at 3 o'clock, near a pillar from 15 meters away. The guy was holding himself by the wrist. There were 2 guys next to him who were chasing Yuan. He turned to him, telling him to get on his knees and bark like a dog. Yuan thought it was a special invitation from the academy. You could tell from his gaze that the guy was showing interest in such a thing. A blue aura was flying around him. The interlocutor waved his hands. Behind him stood the same pursuers, saying that Yuan was an obedient boy. The guy started walking towards them, replying that he had misunderstood him and meant for him to become like that, like a dog. The guy was enraged by his words, launching his fist towards him. A purple aura was created around him. It was terrifying sound waves, threatening him with death. Yuan was confident, and in response to his actions, raised his hand. A red aura formed beside him. It was a fearlessness that removed mind control. The guy asked him why he opened his mouth. The guy directed all his power at him, which scattered everywhere, sending the attacker into the air. A good punch painted on his face. Yuan mouthed that it was too late to ask for mercy. It wasn't the last blow, and without stopping, Yuan punched him further, launching him into the air. Then a fist to the stomach, then kicks to the spine. The pursuers from Such sat on the floor with shock, looking at their fallen comrade who was showing off beatings. Yuan looked at him victoriously. One of them looked surprised. The guy, in his thoughts, didn't understand how someone like Yuan was able to respond to the ruse. They grabbed their comrade under the arm with incredible speed. Running far away from the guy, Yuan looked at them in their wake and asked if they were going to take him to the hospital. His sister was heading somewhere, walking in the direction the guys were coming from. They were holding him up because their friend couldn't stand on his feet. The girl noticed this and mentally asked herself, who could do this to an innocent man? Looking in their direction, the girl earnestly ordered them to stop, drawing attention to herself, and motioned for them to take out their phones. She stomped with all her strength on the ground. Her foot was enveloped in a blue aura. Because of her strength, the ground cracked. The girl ordered them to give the phone back nicely. Her sister crossed her arms over her chest, giving her a demanding look. The guy walked over to her and held out the phone, begging for mercy and for her to take the phone. With a glow on her face, she picked up the phone she had been given, addressing her companion to let his comrade go to the ground and leaning on his 2 hands. The guy did as he was told. The girl, with a satisfied smile, mouthed that the photo was great. One of them excitedly said it was too much. She held the phone in her hands, bringing her index finger closer to the button. The phone, without thinking long, let unlock from her touch. The sister was taking pictures of the guy from all angles, in the same pose she'd ordered him to do, as if photographing some model. She smiled slyly, taking pleasure in it, looking at the pictures on her phone. She decided to send them to all the guy's friends. The sister told them to repost. The guys stood still, replying to her that they would do everything. She asked them if they should explain to the guy how to behave. She looked stern, glaring at them with her piercing gaze, threatening that if they didn't honor her words, the entire process, the girl would discount their friend. The girl was fairly walking away from them. Their friend was still in that position, and the guys knelt down, feeling disappointed, figuring that Yuan wasn't that evil yet. Yuan was sitting next to her beautiful sister, smiling. The girl was holding a kitty in her hands, and there was a blush on her cheeks. She was also smiling. Feng held his phone in his hands, looking at the pictures of the beaten guy. The same guy, sobbing, mumbled that Yuan had not only beaten him, but also published the pictures. The pictures were in various angles, as well as the expression on the young man's face. Feng mentally considered that if he wouldn't have said before, there was no such fun. Feng held the phone in his hand, looking to the young man with interest, asking him to tell him what had been done to him. The guys sat on the bunk. The battered young man began to tell it all as it was, saying with surprise that Yuan wasn't even hurt. Feng thought to himself that the guy had successfully imbibed fearlessness by asking for weapons. Feng mumbled in surprise that how did he do that without a weapon, thinking to himself whether he had absorbed the blow of rage. The guy tearfully replied that if there was a weapon, he would have died. Feng began to walk away with a balk. Saying this to his interlocutor, the guy asked in horror, how could he continue training when Yuan was his enemy? Turning to him, the young man told him to stay home for a couple of months because no one cared about him. The president left the room. The door slammed with a distinctive sound. When the guy asked for his help, Feng said that his injuries couldn't be cured with his techniques. A beam of light passed into the room, illuminating the room in some places. There was a painting hanging on the wall, and in the room itself they were talking about something. Feng was standing beside Yuan, holding something in his hands. He was showing him the ranking of combat power, explaining that only young people participated there. The guy looked on with interest, noticing Xuan Ming in 68th place. The guy approached him saying that he and Brother Feng had come up with this name for him. Yuan looked at him bewildered. Yuan turned away from him, grudgingly asking why he couldn't be called Jun'er. Feng asked with shock if he was serious about it, to which he was asked why the ranking was necessary. Feng happily mouthed that it was like a talent vault, and in his mind, he pictured Yuan with a victorious smile and various talents. The guy stared at his back, telling him that if Feng didn't honor the list, there would be questions. He only reminded him that he had brought him a weapon. He walked over to a crate that held various weapons. In a separate place lay a beautiful sword, all of which was an improved version of the trial sample. Feng grabbed the sword that was lying separately. The guy grudgingly told him to leave the weapon and leave, causing Feng to say with a surprised expression on his face that it should be tried out on the training ground. Yuan remained silent, musing for a while and looking at the other weapon that was in his hands. Feng was all battered on the ground, his face swollen, coughing. He thought that the guy had managed to absorb the blow of rage after all. Yuan looked at the sword, muttering to him that the hospital's psychiatric ward wasn't bad. Advising him to drop by, Feng began to praise him. The guy gave him a good kick with his foot, sending him, already battered, flying, grudgingly telling him to get out. Yuan took the item out of the box, holding the blades Feng had prepared for him in his hands with interest. He put them on himself, thinking with a satisfied grin that since there was a group of shooters here, he should try practicing with knives, with plates. Yuan picked up a device that could be used to learn how to throw daggers, hitting the target directly, a look of surprise on his face. He set the device down. A voice from there warned how far to step back, and when the round would begin, the guy focused his eyes on the object. 3 symbols flew out of the device, flying into the air, waiting to be struck, just as the instructions said, after the proper amount of time. The guy looked at them gravely, holding 3 daggers in his clenched fist, their blades coming out. The appliance began beeping again, preparing to release the plates, warning of the next startup. 4 symbols flew out of it, this time a fair distance from the instrument itself. The object began to beep again, warning of the next launch. As soon as the saucer flew out, the dagger flew straight into it. It all happened again. After a time, the saucer flew out, the device alerted to the launch, and the dagger hit right on target. The guy watched each plate with a piercing gaze, launching daggers at them, each dagger hitting all the plates. Yuan was attentive to all the plates. After hitting them with his daggers, they began to fall to the floor, and the device mumbled the completion of the training, calling his score. The boy squatted down, reaching for the dagger and pulling it out of the plate. He thought it was impossible to stop from such a workout. The device spoke again. Yuan directed his gaze to the simulator, thinking that he would train with this thing every day to increase his level. The sun was shining brightly. There wasn't a soul on the grounds, the rays hitting the building, making their way into the offices by the lighting. Yuan stood and looked at the simulator with curiosity. He was raising his level with only 80 points, thinking that he had room to grow. It was clear by the clock that it was already evening. The guy milled about. Lessons, training, and activities were every day. He was not given assignments from the student union. He looked at his watch, coming to dread the fact that he had forgotten what date today was, and it was only thanks to the watch that Yuan remembered. The guy stood on a bridge, near the sea that could be covered with waves. It was a fishing pier. Looking somewhere in the distance, he wondered why no one was there. His head, with a look of amazement on his face, went upward, hearing some sound that came from the sky. The girl who was on the helicopter threw him a rope ladder, telling him to jump in. The ladder reached him. The girl stood waiting for Yuan to start climbing it. The guy thought that the girl's appearance was unique. Climbing up the ladder that had been thrown down, he reached the entrance, and the girl held out her hand for him to grasp. He accepted this gesture. Grabbing his hand on her wrist, the girl did exactly the same with his hand. They ended up on the helicopter. The girl immediately hugged him, saying that the note was from her, and she thought Yuan wouldn't come at all. The guy didn't know where to put himself. A realization came abruptly to the girl, her eyes going wide, still hugging the guy. She pulled him away from her, asking who he was. The guy himself was shocked. With the same expression on his face as the girl whimpered, saying that she was nothing to him. Her heart was broken. Yuan awkwardly mouthed that he was here for an explanation. Yuan started to go down, saying this and saying goodbye. The girl started to stop him, asking if he was friends with him. He answered her positively. The girl was shocked at his words. Her eyes were the size of 5 pennies. The girl held her chin, pondering that NU Mo, as a proud guy, had come to ask her for help, which meant that they were really good friends. She instantly grabbed him by the shoulders, asking if he was strong. The guy confidently stated that there was something. The girl replied that such talents were needed. The girl warned Lao Mao of the newcomer, telling them to return as soon as possible. The man turned in their direction, agreeing with her. And Kai Jie began showing off her entire lineup to Yuan, the men saying hello to him, calling out their places in her ranks and names. The pilot drew the young man's attention by pointing his thumb at himself. His name was Mao Wei. He was a scout. The guy smiled kindly, recalling his new name. He introduced himself as Xuan Ming. The girl looked at him with an edge of her eye. And Kai kindly began to shake his hand, congratulating him for joining their team. Yuan shook his hand in return, thinking that he would have to do tasks instead of Feng Yu. John looked at them as they spoke. Yuan noticed that her hand was cold, and only said it was normal, recalling that he had seen his name somewhere. Opening his phone, he went to the rankings, seeing his name at 68th place. The guy was still talking to the girl. The leader and all the squad members sat together, looking serious. And Kai began her speech, addressing Xuan Ming about how the task was not an easy one. She told him that a few people had infiltrated the facility to poach. They had lost one of their own, and most had been poisoned. An recalled with sadness on her face. She further continued her speech by mentioning that Feng Yu Mo didn't perceive toxins, and she would understand if the guy didn't want to take part in it. The guy indifferently mouthed that he couldn't chill while sitting on the airplane. Xiang Yuba offered to spar with him. Yuan stopped him with his strength, not allowing the man to move. He froze in the same pose he was. The guy didn't want to talk. After all, there was no time for that. And Kai responded, asking with interest how long it would last. Yuan, releasing his gaze, milled about for a couple minutes. The girl looked at him enthusiastically, not believing what he said, and confirming it with her speech about how she didn't know a freeze could last so long. Yuan got flustered, thinking it was better to find an excuse to his strength. He replied that he just had a skill that boosted the power of the others. The other guys turned to him enthusiastically. Wondering what other abilities he had, Yuan mentioned heat sensitivity. The man kept his arms crossed over his chest, looking very serious and as if he was the lord of something. Jun recalled this man. It was Xuan Mo. He was the lord of snow and ice. He believes that Yuan is not much inferior to him. The man continued to ponder further, questioning himself. Kai asked if the dagger would suit him as a weapon. Yuan gave an affirmative answer. Several unknown persons were standing in a circle discussing something. They were poachers who were in a certain area that looked like some kind of forest. Yuan stopped Kai with his hand, telling them to wait, and warning them that there were a couple of beasts a few meters away. It was as if the guy saw them in his head. He voiced what he saw. It was a pack of wolves that were attracted to something. Kai seriously stated that it was a bait for monsters. But if the wolves are here and there are no units, then it's a bad sign. Yuan suggested that they look around. The pack of wolves could be looked down upon. They were standing near the fire. The smell of meat was strong, making it easy to find the source. But they were afraid it was a trap. The whole squad was in attendance. Yuan immediately stated that he would be the bait for the pack. Kai flailed about the fact that there was probably poison in there, to which she got a response from the guy with his fearlessness of poison. The girl was shocked by his words, asking if it was hard to absorb such an ability. The young man only indifferently agreed with her. He merged into the environment, and Kai said they would cover him. The guy asked her what to do if he encountered someone, to which he was told to shoot to kill. The wolves were walking somewhere, sniffing something, one of them looking off into the distance while the other sniffed. As soon as Yuan stepped with his feet into their territory, the wolves raised their heads and in one voice began to howl. The lad looked on, pondering that the wolves had not attacked him, but had only shown by their howls the presence of an enemy. Two people appeared above him, covered in something that hid their identities. The guy sensed them, immediately proceeding to clear the field. He began to take the dagger, his hand grasping the hilt and pulling it from the scabbard. Yellow-orange flames formed behind him. He counted down the time, running towards the pack of wolves. At this time, the wolves got into position, galloping towards him. He began killing them with his weapon quickly and decisively. Immediately with actions, the wolves didn't have time to attack him. The boy found himself on the ground, shoving his dagger back into its scabbard while the entire pack of wolves behind him lay defeated. The guy stood with his back to them. Not expressing any emotion, he was asked for activating the scorpion venom. His gaze was piercing, looking away, pondering the matter. He was still standing as well, the light not hitting his face, only his back, which he was turned. His gaze didn't change and the corners of his lips lifted, showing a small smile. He dared to activate the poison. His entire body was covered in a blue aura, and a poison began to spread at the place where the dead wolves were. He was asked for activating the scorpion poison. The guy confidently activated it. All the power and strength began to be drawn to him, being absorbed into his body. His abilities increased. Yuan milled that the poison is weak for him. The girl asked Mao Wei about what he said. The man quoted his words, and Kai thought that the enemy is near. The man looked at the way Yuan channeled his power. Carefully, the girl turned around, looking at his back and also watching what the guy was doing. He didn't hesitate, and thanks to his strength, the guy instantly pointed his weapon at the two men. Before he could react, blood began to show on their faces. They collapsed against a tree, lying none. Yuan started walking towards them, muttering that they were some weaklings. The squad members looked on with different emotions, and Kai asked if they had seen everything, to which she got answers from two guys. As they started walking towards their partner, Ankai noticed his weapon he pulled out of them. Yuan milled about that there was no danger yet. The girl looked scared, recalling that such daggers were hard to get, as they were not popular weapons and were handled by the surveillance bureau. She nervously asked him if everything was all right, reasoning to herself that the guy had quietly killed people. Yuan looked at her questioningly. Xiang Yuba praised him, and John Hu asked how long it took to skillfully wield the weapon. Yuan only replied that he practiced with the symbols daily. John looked surprised. After all, these plates had stopped being used due to their difficulty. Hu asked him about this device. Remembering that he hadn't been able to pass a single level, Yuan assured him if abilities were needed to pass a level. The guy started to get caught up in thinking he was a nobody. Ankai talked to Yuan about the abilities. He replied that there were at least 3 in total. She grabbed his hand, wonderingly asking if there really was scorpion venom. The guy assured her that there definitely was. He looked at her with neutrality, and Kai thanked him respectfully and with great gratitude. She started to contact the hospital. Yuan bewilderedly turned to Jun. He confidently stated that the guy had saved many lives. He began to ponder, looking somewhere in the distance, coming to the realization that not everyone could absorb the power of the crystal, because of what technology was needed. And Kai, ending the conversation, asked him what they should do next. The guy flinched at her addressing him. The squad listened to him intently. Yuan stated that it was worth finding the poachers, each of them looking at the men who didn't move. There was fear on the men's faces. One of them was bleeding from his mouth and his face was terribly bruised. A picture of someone taking one of them hostage appeared in his mind. Yuan sternly suggested the idea, reminding him that it would be easier with single units. The girl looked at him curiously, asking if it was worth waiting for them then. The guy looked at her with surprise, giving a positive answer. In the bushes, between the trees, were 4 shadows. Well camouflaged, they were poachers. The guy immediately looked in their direction unkindly, asking Ankai if the right people were coming to them. The right people came out to them, still in the shadows, each of them different, varying in height and strength. The blonde-haired man opened his arms wide in greeting, addressing them that they were finally able to attract such people. He approached Ankai, talking about her being a beautiful lady. The girl was puzzled. A blush appeared on her cheeks. She asked him what they were doing here. The girl asked him to stop, looking annoyed, getting an apology from Robs. Jun warned Yuan to be careful with him. The man poked at Zhao Zhen in surprise, asking how he was still alive. And what was he doing here? Yuan turned around in his direction. He reminded him of how much the country had invested in him. Zhao scornfully replied that his forces had been suppressed after his refusal. With the same scorn, the lad went on to say that, had it not been for other help, he would never have known what being happy was like. The dagger flew somewhere, landing on someone, causing blood to spurt. The man easily stopped the dagger that flew straight into his forehead, looking indifferent to such an action. Using his abilities and stopping the dagger, he fell to the ground with a distinctive sound. The guy looked at it with a piercing look, noting to himself that the man was able to stop his knife, so something else must be used. Robs picked up the dagger from the ground, looking at it curiously, saying something in his native tongue. And Kai turned to everyone, asking what the man said. Robs looked pleased. Mao Wei roughly translated his words. Yuan only remained silent. Yuan sternly began to speak to the man in his native tongue, warning traitors of death, and he does not wish to speak to the dead. Kai looked surprised. Robs enthusiastically told him in his own language that Yuan was pretty good at speaking his language, offering to join them. And Kai restlessly asked about the meaning of his words. Yuan turned around and told her that after their deaths, the man was planning to recruit him. The squad stood across from each other. Yuan walked over to Robs, holding out his hand and demanding his knife back. Zheng watched and mentally asked himself why they needed Xuan Ming. He began to prepare his strength just in case. The guy got his knife back and thanked the man. Robs only laughed and mentioned that in China, loyalty is paramount. With an edge of his eye, Yuan looked at Jian, who had prepared an increase in the target's ability. The guy swept up that help had arrived. Yuan angrily released ice shards in their direction, and while directing them towards them, he once again repeated his words about not talking to the dead. Ice shards headed towards the other squad, instantly coating them in ice, freezing the 3 men. Ice was still flying at them. Yuan launched his daggers at the 3 of them. 2 daggers hit right on target as intended, while one was still flying towards Robs. As soon as the dagger made contact with Rob's body, it instantly flew upwards, missing him. Ice began to melt on the man's face. He looked terribly angry, muttering that the sneaky Chinese had attacked stealthily, wanting them dead. The young man was frustrated, mulling over everything that was going on in his head, noting that since the man had been able to prevent everything, then it would take a hard blow to do the damage. Rob suddenly flew at the guy. He didn't expect such a blow. The man with his strength started to punch him in the stomach. Hitting him with his strength, Yuan bounced off and began to fly a good distance back. Hu and John caught him. He passed out from such a blow, and Kai ordered to heal Yuan as soon as possible. Jiang held up 2 of his fingers to it and concluded with horror that it was most likely stiffened. And Kai couldn't believe it. Still holding the guy, Jiang thundered that there was no heartbeat and no breathing. With a sad look, Jiang placed it on his lap. He was told that this was no time for tears and robs needed to be dealt with. The young man's eyes were closed, but he was conscious. Listening to their conversation, he mentally considered that he was ashamed of being buried. Xiang Yuba held robs to him. Hu channeled his strength towards them. The man only rolled his eyes, imploring them not to even try to kill him. The man's body began to burn. He mumbled something in his language. Xiang immediately paid attention to the fire. He let go of him, and the flames spread faster and faster. Jiang was responding to his flames. The girl took a moment to notice that Robs was a real pro at close combat. Hu was dissatisfied, asking what he should do. Ankang ordered him to try a mental attack. Jiang, Hu, and Xiang covered themselves with their hands. The girl launched a devastating sound wave 600 meters away. Rob's body transformed. The sound wave reached him and he ducked slightly. They decided to seize the moment since the wave had reached. The man chuckled, speaking in his own language for their tricks, repeating again that he couldn't die and his body would burn faster. Rob's body became even more inflamed and he took some sort of stand while continuing to speak in his own language. The amount of flame increased. It passed over the other squad like water, each of them covering themselves with their hands while talking to each other. There were flames on their bodies. Zhuan woke up, addressing them that it was worth retreating. Hearing his voice, the team was surprised. He was heading out determinedly. Unkai wanted to ask something, but the guy replied that he wouldn't die that easily. Jiang milled about that he was immune to death. Yuan approached the man, speaking in his language, asking to fight. Robs asked the reasons for the agreement. The man smirked when he recognized that it would be easier for him to fight against one in this state and accepted his offer. And Kai glared at him, telling him not to do that. Yuan sternly stated for him not to hold back. The squad started to run away from them. Wei grabbed the captain and Zhang explained that they would be in their way, and Yuan needed to be trusted. They stood across from each other. Flames were everywhere, growing larger each time. They were at a distance because of the large amount of flames you can see the vapor. The man said he appreciated his bravery. The guy thanked, and thought they should not be compared. Ice went into his stride again, shards flying towards the man, the guy confidently stating that he was clearly not the one who should die. Screens appeared in front of him, showing what had improved and what hadn't, adding new abilities. Yuan didn't doubt his strength. The man smiled a victorious smile at him, asking if this was indeed his true strength, and proceeded to fight. Clumps and ice swirls started to form right on top of Rob's. He didn't expect such a thing. Yuan only watched it, saying that he had already started a long time ago. Rob's was enveloped in a balloon, and returned to his original form, trying to figure out what was happening to him, and what the invisible wall of air was. The guy watched it, steam emanating around him, explaining to him that it was a special ability that changed the temperature of the air. There was a man in the balloon itself. The arrows showed pressure, space. It all turned into a vacuum. The man grabbed himself by the throat, his face turning blue, his mouth opening as wide as possible and his eyes bulging. He spat right on the shards. Blood came out of his mouth and his face was still blue, the guy explained further. His body would just burn. The man was lying there, smoke and all sorts of dust coming from him, apologizing to his daughter. Yuan continued to watch. All the fire began to turn into one solid ball. The ground beneath it was cracked. The guy started to approach this orb. The effect was over, and further weakness would follow. The flames really started to diminish. His hand reached for the fireball, which went from a large one to a small flame. He took the crystal in his hands with interest. Information behind the abilities the crystal possessed began to appear in front of him. Yuan continued to hold the crystal. A figure appeared in his mind, he pondered, coming to the conclusion that this crystal was unusual and was hiding inside his body. The guy got even more deep in his thoughts. He decided to take it after all. Many abilities can't be improved, and the guys might not know about it. He buried the crystal, standing over it and turning his head. Yuan saw the backpacks, wanting to look into the backpacks, expecting to see something interesting there. Opening the zipper of the backpack, a beaming light from yellow crystals emerged from it. They were available to absorb and enhance, and had the ability to flirt. The guy hadn't expected such crystals. Looking at them with bewilderment, he had further information, and was asking himself what it was. Yuan opened all the bags, and each one had the same crystals in them. He pondered the fact that they had killed the bear cubs for such a thing, and they were most likely valuable. The young man picked up one backpack, holding the strap in his hand, reasoning that perhaps, if he forgot for the name, he would need such a skill. Looking into the bag where the crystals glowed, the lad made a decision for himself to absorb them all. He started absorbing all the crystals, learning that his abilities improved when he looked cute. Next, Yuan Yu's other abilities and their enhancements were told, still holding the bag in his hands. He was dumbfounded by such information. The scout was high up to watch 4 when their contest was over. Smoke appeared at one point. Turning to the captain, he said the battle was over, and Kai was on the ground, stating that it was then worth checking the place they had recently been in. The guy was sitting on the rocks, looking somewhere in the distance of the forest. Someone's voice came from behind him, calling his name. The girl flew out, happily and with tears in her eyes, heading towards the guy, saying that she knew Yuan would survive. And Kai, not noticing anything around her, tripped over a rock and fell to the grass. The guy turned around at the noise, asking her if they could send him back to the academy as soon as possible. The man looked in his direction in surprise, asking if the boy was being trained. He rose from his seat, looking down at them from his high seat, giving Wei a positive answer, and stating that his sister was waiting at dinner, and if he didn't come, she would be angry. The helicopter flew high over the mountains, heading for the academy as the boy had requested. He opened social media on his phone, his sister texting him, asking what happened and why he was nowhere to be found. Yuan read her messages with sadness on his face, and thinking that as soon as he returned, he would need to tell Feng Qingyu and his sister about everything. Yuan turned to the captain sitting next to her. He asked where he could purchase a phone that would work in special zones. Kai milled that it required a permit. She eyed him benevolently, coaxing him that if he joined them, they could get him on board with it. Yuan turned away, replying that he would think about her offer, and the girl confidently stated that they had decent salaries and were given satellite phones. A slight interest appeared on his face. Yuan questioned where it was all located. On the platforms in the system were figures of people. She answered him that it was in Kyushu. She interestedly asked the guy if he was interested. The guy clearly wasn't, causing the girl to get a negative answer. The helicopter arrived at the site, about to land. Wei turned to the captain and reported that they had been misunderstood, and the director had brought people with him. The principal stood with a smile on his face, waiting for them. Behind him, the guys were also watching with interest, waiting for something. Once Kai along with Yuan came out, the man kindly addressed them, telling them who he was. He introduced the guys who were behind him. Guyan looked at them curiously while Shangguan didn't show any emotion towards them. It was as if she was apologizing to the principal, saying that they had only picked up their student. Yuan looked disappointed as well as the principal. The man asked her if the guy was a student of their academy, and Kang bewilderedly asked Yuan how it was that the principal didn't know him, addressing him not by his name. Gu Yan said in the principal's ear that it was Zhong Yuan who was recommended. Shangguan looked with incomprehension in their direction. He was unhappy that Yuan got in through connections. Guan believed he was accepted through merit. The guy angrily told him that they didn't need such trash since he got in through connections. The principal was shocked, and Gu Yan was not surprised. Yuan answered him negatively. Looking at him, he asked himself who it was, and why he was getting so worked up about it. Closing his eyes at this, the boy started to leave, for he had to be on time for dinner with his sister, but Guan shouted for him to stop. Angrily grabbing his arm, he declared that they would fight today. Yuan didn't like his behavior. The girl looked at them, smiling slightly and thinking to herself that Shan had signed his own death warrant. The young man threw Yuan over his hip with all his strength. His body hit the ground hard. There was shock on the commander's face. The young man lay on the ground. Shan poked at him with a perplexed look, asking if he was weak enough to compare to an ordinary human. The squad members were standing around. The girl was holding the guy down, telling him not to close his eyes. Blood was coming out of Yuan's mouth, and Shan only stated that he was pretending. She looked at him restlessly while Yuan didn't move and lay in her arms. Zhang began to heal him, and Kang stared in amazement as the guy stood up and declared that he would get up on his own, thinking to himself that the regenerative ability was of some use. The girl grudgingly turned to Shan, ordering him to apologize. The guy didn't understand why he should apologize. She stated that she didn't even hear a word of thanks for their work, as he immediately threw Yuan over his hip. Shan didn't understand his words. Yuan jumped into their conversation with words that his blood wasn't spilled. She irritably ordered him to shut up, her facial expression and tone making the guy uncomfortable. The principal tilted Shan's head, demanding him to apologize. The guy said he didn't care who the girl was and wouldn't apologize. An Kang looked down as the guy was bent over to apologize, saying that he would report everything to the chief of the war circle. The principal was panicked by her words. The girl was walking with Yuan to take him to the dormitory. This almost made the man fall down, but Gu Yan caught him in time, stating that the academy would not be closed because of a small scandal, to which he received a questioning look from the principal for his attitude based on his position. The man did not understand his question, and the principal, sobbing, replied that he felt he would soon cease to be principal. The dormitory was not small. Trees covered some of the building and sunlight fell on it, illuminating the rooms inside. The guy quietly opened the door, peering between the small slit he'd made. Feng popped out of nowhere, saying that Yuan had returned. Such a surprise made the young man flinch and his eyes were 5 pennies each. The guy instantly closed the doors in front of Feng. A hand appeared from the doorway. He thought he had mistaken the door. Kai looked at what was happening with interest. Feng resented Yuan. After all, he had disappeared all night somewhere, also returning with a girl. Kai answered him in surprise, and the guy stood in a stupor. Yuan flew into the room, telling them to have a chat. Feng turned around in his direction. The girl was also looking into the inside of the room. They looked at each other unkindly. The girl didn't think he would end up in the academy. Feng only spoke for the distribution and asked if she could leave. The guy spread his arms, telling her in his wake that she wouldn't find anyone better than him, and she knew it, the girl grudgingly walking away from Feng. The building was tall, reminiscent of an academy. Sunlight traveled well through the building with a few trees blocking it out. The guys were sitting at the table. Yuan's sister was talking indignantly to Feng, saying how Kai had dragged him into the venture. The guy replied that she needed to help. Yuan listened to them with interest. The guy further spoke while looking indignant, saying that if it wasn't for Lan, there was no telling what might have happened. Yuan turned around to his sister. She was watching carefully. The guy was slightly nervous, starting to talk to them. The girl, crying and holding her hands in fists, told him that she did not approve of their marriage, and after it she would treat him even worse. The guy looked at her with incomprehension. Yuan took her hand, seriously declaring to Lan that if he ever got married, he wouldn't skip class. She looked at him in amazement. Lan asked the question businesslike what he would do if Kai came back. Yuan assured her that he would get rid of her. The girl didn't really like that answer. She turned to Feng, seriously stating that he would protect Yuan when she wasn't around. Such a statement made Feng look shocked. He looked like an old grandfather, responding to her words with the certainty that anyone who offended Yuan would become a corpse. After his words, Feng realized that he had more studying to do then, and he would benefit from it. The guys further talked to each other on various topics, someone watching them, sitting further away from them, and writing down information in a notebook. Lan looked with concern at her brother, while Yuan looked the other way, holding the food in his wand. The watcher analyzed them, coming to the conclusion that Yuan had a poor appetite, picking up on the external details. The guy was holding a notebook, still writing down his tests and musings, puzzled as to why Yuan wasn't eating, and if he had anorexia. Lanya was passionately eating her food that was in her plate. The guy paid attention to her, saying that she had an increased appetite, adding more food each time. Feng looked like he was thinking about something while he ate. The watcher looked at him, noting that he didn't like spicy food, for there wasn't a single piece of spicy food in his plate. Yuan was heading towards the exit with his sister. The very same watcher addressed him. The guy stopped, looking slightly surprised. The boy was holding his sister's hand when the young man approached them confidently, with a suggestion to go to a nice restaurant that was near the academy. Yuan declined his offer. When Lan heard something over the food, she raised her hand with a satisfied expression, speaking for her. Yuan looked at her with disappointment. The guy was not surprised by this behavior. He began to remain silent, various emotions on his face, leaving him stunned and not knowing what to do with his sister. The guy poked at him grudgingly, saying he noticed him looking at his sister. The guy was confused, replying that he was looking at him. Lan turned the young man around, surprised that her brother not only had female admirers but also bowed. The guy was numbed by such words, and Yuan looked at what was happening. The brother grabbed his sister under his arm, running away from him with great speed. Yuan said he was a pervert and should stay away from him. Lan asked for lunch, for which the brothers said they would go themselves. Feng turned to them, telling them to take him along too since they were going to have a snack. Hearing their voice, the brother and sister stopped, dust forming around them. The girl tried to understand everything. Yuan, looking serious, asked Feng if he liked spicy food without looking at him. The guy looked at him with confusion. He moved closer to his face, slyly asking what he had done. Yuan, looking at him, asked if he had seen everything, getting an affirmative answer. Feng, with a smile on his face, started to tell him that Shan had been ticketed for insult and slander. Yuan answered him with his own smile. Thanking him, Lan looked curiously at them. The girl held his wrist. There were a lot of people in this place because of the big discounts in the diner. The girl swept it up. They walked into the building. Yuan offered her to bring food. The girl listened to him attentively until someone approached them. The girl smiled at Yuan. He looked at her with interest. She only replied that he was a celebrity on the forum. Feng interrupted her, realizing now what she had taken 4 seats for when she was sitting by herself. The girl was not happy with his presence, asking where he had come from. A bright purple glow could be seen from under his black glasses, answering with a sly smile on his face that they had come to eat. Feng turned to the cook, telling him to bring them malatan of varying readiness, the cook looking at him questioningly. The guys sat down at the table. The girl called out to them. Silence hung near them, each waiting for their food. The girl sadly asking herself why they were looking at her strangely. They looked at her differently in her eyes. Feng studying her. Yuan like a punching bag, and Lan as if she was a male hunter. Her sister asked her name. Her name was Suwan Ying. She approached Feng, covering her mouth with her hand and asking his opinion. Yuan only let their conversation pass. Feng started to tell her that she was the strongest assistant and the only one in their country. Suwan glowed, but she was embarrassed to hear it. Lan stated with a sad expression that the girl would stop being the only one when she grew up. The guy carefully told her that she shouldn't be in a hurry to grow up. Feng turned to Yuan, observing that Suwan worried him. The guy looked at him carefully. He thought that the one didn't look worried, and learned that the girl didn't want to lose face. The guy sternly told her to tell him what she needed since she was aware of his presence. Suwan lowered her gaze, pondering about something. She responded with the same look, stating that the academy was gathering students for a competition and they needed 2 teams of 4 people. The guy gave a tired look, asking what this had to do with him. The girl excitedly suggested he try it, due to the 3 seats being vacated. Yuan was uninterested with this. Turning away and showing it with his whole appearance, the girl looked at his behavior uncomprehendingly. His gaze changed to curiosity. He asked Suwan, would it be so hard to win the championship with her abilities, adding that it was bad to fight with her classmates. The girl was infuriated. She asked if it was easier to assemble a team with maximum strength. Feng and Yuan didn't hide their disinterest in it, after all. There was no use in competing. Suwan, hearing their words, froze with astonishment on her face. She didn't know what to say to them, and a language barrier appeared from somewhere. Panting, the girl walked away from them, saying she had nothing to say. The waitress turned in her direction, looking questioningly while the guys just watched her walk away. They were brought plates of food. There were 4 of them, and 1 serving, which was Suwan's. Lan took 1 for herself, saying she would add a couple spoonfuls of chili to her portion. They started eating the food. Feng thought it was Shan's idea, but eventually the girl came on her own. Yuan asked him if they knew each other, to which he learned that Feng, Shan, and Suwan were the main trio. The girl was crying from how spicy the food was. Tears appeared in her eyes. Apparently she had overdone the spices. Yuan carefully pulled her portion while holding his own, telling her to take his portion. Lan's face didn't change, and Feng watched. Feng was immersed in memories, saying that there were individuals in the competition, but the girl specifically didn't mention it, as well as the award. Yuan started eating a large plate of spicy food as if it wasn't spicy, Feng said with shock if his tongue even worked. He ate the whole plate, with a little bit of food left on his face. His tongue really wasn't working, and after assuring me he was fine, he asked for the reward. Feng started explaining for the rewards. Each place was given different crystals, from the highest category to the middle category. On top of that, they could join any team to practice. Lanya ate a portion, wondering why that girl had come after her brother if this competition wasn't for warriors. Feng asked him if he had told his sister, to which Yuan regretfully said that he was looking for an opportunity to discuss it. Feng silenced him to tell him now. He stated to her with a calm expression that he was a warrior. The girl's eyes went wide. She was amazed and asked how much energy he had absorbed. The boy didn't change in his gaze, looking still as calm, looking at her. He answered her that he had absorbed enough energy to become a warrior. Her sister couldn't hold back her tears when she heard his words. They rolled and fell right onto the back of her hand, looking like they were some peas. Her sister's face was flushed with tears. Her beautiful eyes were still streaming with tears. She looked at her brother and whimpered, saying that he had not long to live. Sweat ran down Feng's face, looking at them with incomprehension, especially after hearing the words just now from his crying sister. The guy asked how it was that he was going to die soon. The girl was still crying, looking flushed. She reached up with her trembling hands to her face, wiping away her tears. She replied that once absorbed, the 2 abilities had taken 20 years of her life. This meant her brother had much more. Yuan felt several emotions at the same time. Panic and shock, all emotions that were horrible. He didn't believe her words, asking again about it. There were no lanterns or any kind of lighting near the concrete wall. There were no people walking by either. And high in the sky was the moon, lightly illuminating the wall. In the sky was a bird that was flying. The boys were in the room. Feng stood behind them watching them. And what was in the basket? Yuan was looking closely at the crystal. Lan, still blushing, said it was the 3rd crystal she was supposed to absorb from Uncle Lin. She hid her sad look, trembling as if a wave of tears would come over her again. Yuan looked in her direction with pity, understanding now why the girl had fought so desperately in her past life. The guy turned towards Feng, looking serious, approaching the matter. He asked if absorption took away years of life, and if it could be fixed. Qin replied that only not severely, and the sister's case is unheard of. Yuan was not much pleased with his answer, asking him with a yes or no answer. Feng confirmed that life is a bit shortened, and there is no technology that can prevent it. Feng reached his hands towards his glasses, taking them off. You could tell from his face that he was very focused, and his shining eyes activated the ability. With a piercing gaze, the boy looked in the direction of the sad girl. The numbers of her life were showing above her head. He thought to himself that she had really lost 20 years of her life. And since it was hereditary, it was the same with his brother. Turning his attention to the guy who sat with a stern expression on his face, he saw his current lifespan above his head. It was empty. He asked himself if this was possible. The box that contained the crystal began to close. Yuan turned to his sister, telling her not to do anything Uncle Lin had told her to do. Lan began to say that he had high hopes. The guy assured her that he would explain everything. He hugged his crying sister restlessly. There were still tears at the corners of Lan's eyes. The boy told her that without her he would lose the meaning of life and that she should promise not to continue to do so. From his words, his sister cried again, tears streaming down her red face. Burying her face into his chest, she said, "How to protect him if she doesn't become a warrior? Ordinary people can't survive." Yuan moved slightly away from her, releasing her from the embrace and wondering what ordinary people were to her. With tears in her eyes, her sister looked at him with interest. The guy was running as fast as possible, participating in the competition, victoriously surging ahead. The man was pointing at the territories, fielding warriors. Ordinary people could become stronger through exercise, winning the war through strategies. Doctors and nurses flew as fast as possible to the operating room. There was a man in a hospital bed who needed to be saved. Yuan continued that these were all talents. The guy launched something towards the wall. The girl turned around in surprise, looking the other way. Yuan mauled that crystals wouldn't make a person stronger, and the first person to fight back against the monsters clearly didn't possess it. The dagger went straight into the wall, making a distinctive noise in the room and going well into it. The young man mused that she could do the same if she practiced hard. He placed his hand on her head, saying with a smile on his face that she had enough and 2 abilities, and if Lan practiced hard, she would achieve a lot. His sister looked at him with admiration, promising him to try her best. Yuan sternly directed his gaze towards Feng, asking him if Lan would be investigated like a guinea pig. Feng interjected with confidence, calling it nonsense. Holding his glasses in his hands, he pointed them toward his face, putting them back on his eyes, stating that lab rats didn't like anything new, so there was no cause for concern. The guy, hearing his words, closed his eyes in relief and sighed, believing his words that Feng had said. Yuan asked to give Lan her phone, putting his palm forward towards her. The girl obediently, holding the phone with both hands, held it out into her brother's palm. There was a man sitting at the desk. The papers he was working with were on the desk. He held the phone up to his ear curiously, addressing Lan, but Yuan was on the phone. The guy held the phone near his ear, looking businesslike and communicating with his uncle. He stated that Lan could no longer absorb the crystals and he needed to take them away. The man assured him that she would be cured. Yuan reminded his uncle that it was hereditary. The man spoke sternly into the tube that he himself had allowed her to become a warrior, and the curriculum had been tweaked to fit her sister. He asked what else they wanted him to do, whether to replace her, reminding her that the boy didn't have enough ability. Yuan told him that his abilities were as good as his sister's, and he would do well. The man grudgingly asked how he could lie so blatantly. The guy offered to prove his words to him. The man spoke sternly into the tube that he was taking away all privileges, including his sister. And if Yuan made it to the top 10 in the individual standings of the student league, then he would be believed. They each began to disperse, bringing the girl to the building. She happily said goodbye to them. Heading off the premises, Yuan wished her good night, waving back while Feng watched them. After they took the girl away, the 2 guys walked together. Feng milled about that he could make Yuan live with his sister. The guy calmly stated that she should have friends besides him. Feng gushed to Yuan that he was overprotective of her anyway. They continued to talk. Yuan asked the guy with a bored look if anyone else knew for his vision ability how long a person would live. Feng happily told him that he was the first to know about it, and he believed that the guy wouldn't reveal the secret to anyone else. Feng reminded him about thinking for himself right now. After all, he was cut off resources and conditioned to enter the top 10. Hearing his reminiscing, Yuan became saddened by this fact. The guy caustically, as if teasing, suggested him to turn to someone, recalling the woman he had encountered when Yuan came back. Yuan's face immediately changed. He enthusiastically agreed with him. Feng didn't expect the guy to agree to his joke so easily. The expression on the guy's face instantly changed to a frustrated expression. He turned to him, hoping that Yuan would change his mind from such an undertaking. The brother immediately started calling Anne, directing his gaze to the phone, listening to the person on the phone. Once he was answered, the guy asked how much resources were left from the last sortie. Feng behind the young man listened to their conversation with astonishment. Holding the phone in her hand, the girl answered something into the receiver. The guy flinched, happily thanking her and telling her that he would remain in debt. The people in the warehouse were running around nervously, from side to different sections. One of them grabbed a cart that had some stones on it. Someone asked Kai why she needed their help. She gave the order to find resources. After all, she needed them urgently. A human hand held a pen. In the other hand, a journal in which he was trying to write something down at breakneck speed. A voice announced to them that the situation was urgent, asking how many resources there were in the warehouse and ordering them to count everything and bring it in. Two men were sitting in the office. One of them was wearing a special uniform, holding a magazine. The other was just wearing a business suit. They were discussing the situation. The man praised Kai, but considering that the main merit was on Xuan Ming. And Guangfeng looked serious. It was the same man in the business suit, saying that on this outing, there were many people affected by the poison. He feared that the situation could only get worse in the future. His look changed. His eyes spoke for themselves. He suspected someone, because of which he was not happy about it, saying that there was a possibility that a spy had infiltrated them. Lu Jianlin was looking at something in the journal with interest. It turned out to be a report, reading all the information from it. The man said that there was Zhao Zheng who used his strength. Guangfeng lowered his head as well as his gaze, attentive and focused, pondering over Jianlin's words that had just transpired in the room. The star was on an unknown man, saying that he was associated with something. The man said that there is a possibility that this person is from an underground organization, and officials turn a blind eye to them because they have their own principles. Guangfeng still looked serious as well as Jianling. The man mumbled that this time the stick had been overdone. He agreed that it made one worry and began to speak for his daughter. The man inquired about her daughter. A report appeared in his hands. Reading it with astonishment, John mused that the girl had given orders to collect all the crystals that came out to over 2,000. Guangfeng did not believe his words. Closing the report, and with his hand threw it on the table, banging on it loudly, he muttered that it was some nonsense. The man clenched his fist, stating with irritation that there was no point in these crystals because they were ineffective and virtually incompatible with the others, and the man's efforts to absorb them would go down the drain. Jianling held the papers in his hands, saying that the report said Yuan's ability to absorb poisons. The man looked at him questioningly, folding the papers further. Jianling asked him if the crystals should be given to the guy. Someone's masculine hand touched the cover of the report that was inside on sheets of paper with the pads of their fingers. The man thought it was hard to say anything about it. Jianling, with seriousness on his face, suggested that Guangfeng give 1,000 and put a surveillance on Yuan, just in case. The man, after thinking over his words, strongly agreed with him. The man slammed angrily on the table, muttering why his brother couldn't be given a proper burial when he died for their country, giving it to the research institute. The man calmly stated that it was his decision, and they had no influence on it. He shouted at him, telling them not to dishonor his family name. The man looked as if he was fed up with it, but he calmly replied that such a thing was impossible in his lifetime, that it would remain impossible after his death as well. The girl stood in front of a man wearing a coat. They were separately under an umbrella. It was raining outside. He addressed her as Yumo. She became the heir of the Feng family, and the man asked her not to remember for her brother. Yumo held the umbrella in her hands and looked at him with a smile, saying that this was the future he had prophesied for the Feng family. She wondered if the man would be able to feel free again. The man in glasses, also holding an umbrella because of the rain, looked with seriousness somewhere in the distance, not answering the girl to her questions that had just sounded. The girl looked slyly in the man's direction, mouthing her incomprehension to how they thought since they were missing out on such a valuable player, extending her hand in his direction. The man, with seriousness on his face, did not reply anything to her words, leaving the place they were in, muttering to the girl to go. Yumo confusedly asked him to wait. Yuan was in the office, standing across from a woman. Papers were lying on her desk. The guy stated to her that he wanted to participate in the student league. The woman replied to him that he was just one, and the competition was a team competition. He looked at the woman who sat in the chair and glared at him in response to his piercing gaze. He stated that he was fully prepared. The woman grudgingly said that this should have been announced beforehand, but she started to hold out papers to him anyway. It was a form to fill out. Yuan reached for the papers, grabbing them. Taking the papers with her and carrying them in her hands, the woman looked in his direction, watching the action as the guy began to move away from her. The guy sat down at the vacant seat, placing the paper on the table. Taking a pen, he began to study what he needed to write. Only 8 points were required of him. He held up a pen with his index finger and thumb, entering his data on the papers, every item that needed to be. Mentally, he considered not speaking for Iceblood, and needing to understate. The woman held the form in her hands with surprise after receiving it, reading all the information about Yuan that he had listed in the papers, noting that he had immunity to death, She immediately realized who it was. Jumping up from her workstation, she flew over to him, regretting the way she was treated. The woman started apologizing to him. Yuan was shocked by such behavior. She started to tell him that a person can absorb 8 abilities, and absorbing more than that, he would die. And Yuan also has immunity to death, which is a rare ability. While the girl was talking, he looked at her with surprise. Confused, Yuan motioned for her to stand up and talk. The girl stood up, wiping the tears from her eyes with her hands, saying that if she had known, she would have given him the best crystal of the ruins, not letting lowly skills have a place in his body. There were still tears in the girl's eyes, flowing down her cheeks and approaching Yuan, asking how Major Lin had discerned her sister's talent, and him just being sent here as an escort. The guy listened to her attentively. He began to ponder. His talent was similar to Lan, but neither before nor after rebirth, no one could see his years of life. Coming to this conclusion, the guy marveled at it. Yuan further pondered. It was clear from his face that he was thinking about something, recalling the golden sarcophagus in his mind, asking himself if he had activated his talent. The truth was, he still couldn't detect it. He needed to look at it again. Yuan held onto the table, saying that there was no need to speak for the past and he was fine with everything. The girl awkwardly looked at his profile, saying that his abilities should be looked at carefully. Examining his profile carefully, the girl began to discuss his abilities. His freezing level was high and thought it should be enough for battle. She started to ask how he had some skill that could only be obtained by consuming a beast crystal that was forbidden to hunt. Yuan stared silently, holding onto his chair. The girl considered further, wondering what the charm was, and if he could demonstrate it. The guy sighed heavily, warning that he wasn't very good at it. She continued her speech that since he had absorbed the ability, it shouldn't be underestimated. Yuan leaned his hands on the table, activating the charm ability. An incomprehensible background appeared behind him, and an ordinary smile appeared on his face. The girl was looking at him. The girl's face read confusion. She had hoped to see something more than just what he had shown her. She asked him if that was all it was. The guy looked exhausted, as if all the juices had been squeezed out of him. He assured her that he had indeed used the ability. Sitting at her laptop, the instructor looked still confused, asking herself why she couldn't feel anything. There was something on the laptop screen. Holding it with her hands, the girl turned away from Yuan, who looked astonished. She slightly leaned over, hiding her pitying look, thinking that she couldn't hurt his feelings, and never mind that the ability was useless. The instructor suddenly started scribbling something on her laptop keyboard. Staring piercingly into the screen, she asked what their family's income was. She further continued typing with interest, replying that she didn't care and they would just write the amount for him to qualify for a better scholarship, and the apprentice program would be the best. She pressed her fingertips on the keyboard, telling him that there shouldn't be a problem for the scholarship with his grades, and he had the option of transferring to another class. The guy froze, looking amazed that his ability was so weak that it didn't even work. The instructor further continued to do something on the laptop. She had the papers in her hands, mentioning with a calm look that regeneration of his level was rare and useful. Yuan flinched, starting to tell her something, but the girl interrupted him that as an example you could cut off a piece of hair. She took the scissors, approaching Yuan. She watched carefully and held his hair, cutting off a chunk, telling him not to move. There was excitement on the guy's face. He earnestly clapped his 2 hands together, looking into the distance with concentration, activating his regeneration ability. The ability activated, his hair grew rapidly with instantaneous speed, becoming very long behind his back. Yuan stretched his arms forward, his long hair almost completely covering his face. He excitedly asked the instructor if she could lend him money for a haircut. The girl didn't know what to say. His appearance slightly refreshed, only by his waist-length hair, he walked out of the office, closing with a distinctive sound with his hand. He was walking down the corridor, heading somewhere, thinking about the fact that this weakness had lowered all of his stats, but didn't affect the final regeneration effect. Coming out of the corner of the corridor, Yuan suddenly collided with some guy who was walking in the other direction that Yuan was, causing them to crash into each other. The guy fell strangely to the floor. Some aura akin to a charm appeared around him. He apologized and mouthed that he couldn't see where he was going. The guy looked at him questioningly, not sure what to do. In Yuan's mind, he wondered why he apologized if he was knocked down. He opened one eye, looking at the young man who stood before him, examining him with wonder, mentally asking himself if the uniform on the boy was from another academy. His face reddened, looking at Yuan in a friendly manner. Cupid's arrow hit his heart. The guy thought he had crashed into a beautiful high school girl, and the action is as if in a romantic manga. Yuan stood up, grabbing the back of his head with his hand. Around him, everything was shining in his eyes. He noticed to himself that the so-called girl had black long hair, and she was gentle and beautiful, though her voice was rough, but he hoped it was a girl. The guy was still flushed, asking his name and holding out his hand. Yuan didn't understand why he needed his name as he apologized to him. Mentally, he came to the conclusion that he didn't want any trouble, and like a bullet, ran away from the guy towards the door. Before he knew it, Yuan was gone. He walked to the same door that Yuan had recently come out of, fist banging on the door a few times. The guy made the decision to take care of business first, and then find the so-called girl he had run into. The instructor gave permission to go in. The young man opened the doors and walked inside, looking in the girl's direction carefully. Jian Tianshou introduced himself. He was the president of the student union of Hualin Academy. Being in front of her desk, he stated the purpose of his visit. The instructor kindly said hello and asked to take a seat. The girl was pouring the drink into a cup, wondering why Jian Tian wanted her to do the organizing. The young man watched her actions with a small smile on his face. They sat across from each other, a cup with a drink on the table beside Jian. He told her that he was just losing interest, and this year's speaker would be them. The woman sipped her drink and recalled that last year's competition was hosted by the legendary trio. She was unsurprised that they wanted an exclusively freshman-to-freshman competition. Holding the cup in her hand, by the woman's eyes and facial expression read confidence, she promised him. But the time was up to Jian. He enthusiastically agreed with her. The instructor smiled at his words, reflecting that from his academy, the students from his academy were all from wealthy families, and their level was higher than her students. But she believed that failure was also good to experience. The woman brought the drink to her lips, gazing piercingly and pondering whether to announce Zhang Yuan's strength to the rest of the disciples before the competition. The sky darkened, becoming a color of dark brown with a dash of light. Somewhere in the distance was some sort of red dot. Rays of sunlight passed through to the building, illuminating the side that was towards the sun. On the door hung a red and blue object that spun around inside. Yuan came to the barber shop. The barber stood behind him, with scissors and a special comb. Analyzing his hair, the guy asked for something to be done to his hair. The man crossed his subjects, gleefully declaring that he was a barber, not a wizard, his sister puffing, asking the barber to make him into an unremarkable young man. Once the man said ready, then Yuan looked different. He had his bangs trimmed, his split hair smoothed out, and his curls made more lively. Lan, at this picture, said he was missing the bows. The girl happily grabbed his hair, making ponytails and offering him to do them. The barber turned around, watching cautiously while Yuan looked like a victim, replying to his sister that ponytails would be overkill. Lanya pouted at him, remembering that when she was little and didn't like to brush her hair, her brother had told her that ponytails were for the strong. The boy awkwardly turned away from her. He placed his hand on her head, seriously stating that she was an adult, and the guy would unlock the sealed black magic for her. Lan watched with the same look, interested in his actions. On the table were the tools used by barbers, special combs, and 2 pairs of scissors. When Lan came out of the hairdresser's shop, she said happily that she could now give Yuan different beautiful hairstyles, and he agreed to her words, saying that he would gather her hair into ponytails. Crossing her arms over her chest, the girl agreed with him contentedly, glowing from the deal. Yuan flinched at such, not believing her words. Next to it was a building with a balloon shape. It was all a training room. Behind the building were others, mostly high-rises. Jian Xie Yuan was the twin sister for Jian Tianshou. She walked into the room, asking Yin with interest why she decided to increase her training. She stood still, asking if it was because of Zhang Yuan's refusal that she was reacting like this. Yin didn't say anything, only continuing to run, looking red. Xie Xuan approached her, holding out water to her tired roommate. The girl stated that for Feng Qin, his man was Yuan. She asked if this was a hint that she was not strong enough. The girl's face was flushed. She happily accepted the water bottle, opening it, telling Si that Feng was the strongest of them all, but not her. Yin mumbled that she needed to exercise more, sipping water from her bottle. Her roommate asked what she should do then since she would exercise more. Someone called her. Picking up the phone, the girl smiled happily. It was her brother. She asked what kind of spy stuff he was talking about, pulling his knees up to his side, a look of embarrassment on his face as he asked this of his sister. But Tian needed to find the very hottie he had encountered in the hallway. He recalled with horror that Ji Xuan thought her brother was a complete zero when it came to dealing with girls. But now he could step out of her shadow since they're in different academies. The brother told his sister everything as it was, where they ran into each other, and after describing Yuan's appearance, the girl curiously asked if he had really decided to hit on her. Tianshou started to answer her question. His face slightly flushed and a smile formed on his lips. He replied that he was thinking about the fact that he liked this girl. His sister shouted happily that he liked girls, and their lineage would not be interrupted. His brother mumbled something into the phone. She assured him that she would do anything to find her. And Kai sat together in the study with her father, with interest in how good the guy was. The man smiled at her, saying this was the third time for him. She asked her father's opinion. The man held up his drink, speaking for Yuan, saying that although his level was superior to his peers, he lacked ambition. He didn't join anything. And when he was thrown over his hip, he just turned a blind eye to it. Yuan was sitting in the chair like some kind of boss. Everything was shining around him, and he was holding a cigar in his hands. Her father said that controlling Yuan would not be easy, and she should give up. And Kai grudgingly started to leave the room, panting that she wouldn't tell him anything else. Her father only assured her that it was worth making friends first. A text message arrived on his phone. The man pulled out his phone and began to look at it carefully, questioning himself for changing his profile and level. Yuan's information was open in his phone. He was sure that the stolen crystal had gotten to him, reading into his secret information. The man recalled Rob's. He was someone who had similar abilities at Yuan's age as well, and the flaming giant was a unique ability for the country. The sun was shining brightly outside, especially on the dormitory. The building looked like a normal shape, but at the top was a roof that looked like flags. The same courier was carrying a large safe, kindly inquiring if he had changed his hair, remarking that the length suited him. Yuan crossed his arms over his chest, blissfully replying to the messenger that he had originally wanted to cut his hair short, but his sister had insisted. The courier carefully placed the large safe, reminding the guy to remember to give it 5 stars. Yuan agreed. The guy began to examine the safe carefully. He needed to know the password, and as he entered the combination, the safe door clicked, hinting that it had opened. In the safe was a decent amount of crystals. Taking a piece of paper in his hands, he was asked not to thank. Yuan knew that thanks to these crystals will pump up quite well and reach a new level. He carefully brought his hand towards them. The illumination of the crystals fell on the guy, and Yuan made a decision to absorb all the crystals of the ruins. The crystals began to absorb into the guy's body, creating a bright aura around them. The guy watched them intently, taking note of what he was pumping. His eyes went wide and his pupils narrowed as he realized that there were so many crystals that he could continue to improve. Yuan closed his eyes, taking another amount of crystals to improve the many abilities he had. After devouring everything, he clutched his head, recalling his teacher's words about the crystals containing the negative energy of a dying monster, and right now, he could feel it well because of the quantity. Yuan focused his gaze into his hand, noting that he didn't need sleep, but right now he was feeling drowsy, warning himself not to absorb everything in the future. The guy started to analyze what he got for his new abilities. A beast appeared in his mind that was originally a child and then became a strong beast. The monster's eyes were filled with purple flames. It was huge and terrifying. Its teeth were incredibly sharp, with which it could easily tear apart a victim. The monster's hand was large. It resembled a human hand, but instead of fingers, it had sharp, thin claws. Yuan recalled the sarcophagus he was dragged into, pondering further for his rebirth and looking serious. A hand reached upward out of his eye. Feng approached him from behind, deciding to teasingly cover his eyes with his hands. Asking who it was, the guy only opened his mouth. After that, a great shouting sounded in the building they were in, which could have made the walls shake. Yuan muttered that the guy was lucky since he didn't break his arm. Feng tearfully replied that he had knocked, but the guy didn't reply and stood in a daze. The young man asked him for the purpose of the visit. Something lit up with a green tribe in Feng's hands. He reminded him for the student council meeting. There were people sitting at the table. Each of them had a piece of paper and a glass of water. The girl wondered if it was overkill that the chairman and Zhang Yuan weren't there. The guy crossed his arms over his chest, contemptuously declaring that there was no reason for some trash to take up space here. The girl looked at him with incomprehension. The door to the office opened. Feng and Yuan appeared from the doorway, addressing everyone that he would introduce the new council member, to which everyone turned in their direction. They walked to the office. Feng smiled kindly, giving them a brief information about Yuan. The guy said hello to the guys, giving his name again. The council members had various emotions from this short information, remaining in a daze or looking disgruntled. Feng pointed him to an empty seat, raising his eyebrows in surprise upon seeing the red-haired guy. Yuan agreed with him, also looking towards that guy. He sat down on a chair while Feng stood behind him. The girl turned to him, saying that he had taken the seat that was for the chairman. Yuan's gaze was displeased, looking towards the girl. He asked her wryly, "Did that mean he wasn't allowed to sit here?"